As a girl, the scariest thing about playing video games online is most definitely the weird interactions I have with random guys. Like a lot of my friends who play online, will deliberately obscure their gender with a nondescript username and profile picture and will never ever talk in party or game chats if there are guys present, which as you can imagine, there pretty much always is. But I've never been too concerned with presenting my real personality online. That, and I won't allow any creeps to force me into hiding who I am. But that doesn't mean I don't have some interactions or get some messages that genuinely creep me out. And here are a few of the weirdest or most disturbing I've come across so far. So I'm part of the PC gaming master race. Over the past few years, there's been an increasing amount of use of the Microsoft Party Chat thing for games purchased using the Microsoft Store. But generally speaking, the app we use to organize and communicate is Discord. Discord is nice in that you can't just get random messages from users at any time, but if you share a server with someone, they can pretty much DM you whenever they want. And since I'm in a lot of servers for the games I play, this leaves me pretty vulnerable to random DMs from creeps with less than innocent intentions. I suppose it doesn't help that one of my favorite games to play is Dead by Daylight. For those that don't know, it's a horror game in which one person plays as the killer, while the other players take on the roles of their victims, having to complete various tasks while evading the killer so they can escape whatever environment they're trapped in. This obviously attracts its fair share of online sadists who love nothing more than to terrify and traumatize the people they're hunting. They go so far as to insist on always being the killer, never ever playing as a survivor, and naturally this means they get really good at hunting people with their characters of choice. That's how I came across one particular player who specialized as a Dead by Daylight killer known as the Clown. Now I hate clowns with a passion, to the point where I couldn't bring myself to go see that It movie, even when my Stephen King fanatic boyfriend was so excited about seeing it. They just absolutely terrify me, probably because, and my mom never gets tired of telling me the story, I had a pretty traumatizing encounter with a party clown at a kid's birthday party when I was younger. The clown in Dead by Daylight is like all of my circus nightmares come to life. It kind of looks like a combination of a clown and a ringmaster, but has allusions to other circus stuff on him too. The face is all this worn-out grease paint smeared over a flabby mess of folds, but perhaps the most horrible are the fingers dangling from the thing's belt, the trophies he takes from his unfortunate victims. So, when this player happened to prefer the clown over others, I was kind of reluctant to play at first, but the group of survivors I usually play with adored him for the effort he put into role-playing the character, and therefore how much more intense and scary he made the whole experience. Like he kept putting this super creepy clown voice on over voice chat while he was chasing us, to the point where these big tough guys, self-confessed horror junkies, are just squealing in terror whenever he was chasing them. I think that's about the one thing that made it bearable for me. How funny it was when they were wailing like scared little girls. But let me tell you, it wasn't so fun when he was chasing me, and boy did he chase me a lot. At the end of the night, when a few of us were like, alright, that's enough terror for me, better log off before I give myself nightmares, I got a Discord DM from the guy saying, "You were really fun to chase." I tried to be polite enough, just replying with something like, "Cheers, dude, not too much fun to chase, I hope," with a little laughing emoji. Then he follows up with what seemed like was going to be a really long message, like the typing notification thing was going off for like a good few minutes, while I'm like, please don't be creepy, please don't be a creep. Then instead of some big long message, he only sends me a few words. I wish this was real. It was creepy enough sentiment on its own, but the thing that got me was that there was absolutely no way he spent so long typing out just 5 words. What else did he want to say to me that he ended up deleting and retyping over and over again for a minute straight that only ended up with 5 little words? I seriously dreaded to think what it might have been. The following night, we were all getting ready to play Dead by Daylight again, voice chatting on Discord when one of our party chat was like, "Oh, Clown Guy's online again. Should we invite him in?" My initial reaction was like, God no, but I'm not one to be a killjoy. The other guys really seemed to enjoy him, so I just found myself acquiescing to the idea and letting them invite him into our voice chat. Everyone greets him like, "Hey, Clown Guy," and instead of being polite or whatever, his first words are, Is Ruby playing tonight?" He must have known well that I was playing. I was in the same voice chat as him, for God's sake, so the idea that he was asking so he could, hear my voice or something got the session off to a nice, creepy start. As weird as the dude was, he had been a great killer. He was passionate enough to bring energy to the character, but not skilled enough as to make it completely unfair on us. He also spent fairly equal time chasing each of us, not partaking in the act of tunneling as it's become known and focusing on one particular character. But that night, all he did was chase me. He would simply ignore any other survivor, searching for me and me alone to chase, torture, and kill. And once he'd achieved that, he'd just sort of waste time, letting the other survivors get the generators going so they could escape the stage and get a new round going. The first time around, his behavior went unnoticed by everyone but me. I think my fellow survivors were just too focused on their tasks and too elated with the victory to really notice what he was doing. But the second round it became obvious, and by the third, my usual crew was starting to confront him on it. "Hey, stop tunneling Ruby, dude, you're ruining the game," they'd say. But Clown Guy just ignored them and started breathing heavily down the mic. Now, this wasn't just him having it too close to his face, which is a problem a lot of people have, and is generally remedied by a quick heads-up followed by them apologizing and moving the microphone. But Clown Guy was breathing heavy because he was enjoying chasing me a little too much. It was like you could hear all this gross satisfaction in his breath whenever he caught up with me, and it got so bad at one point that the other party members started to make some pretty crude jokes about his state of arousal. After one particular bad round, and me basically pleading with the other guys to kick him from the game and from the voice chat, they conceded and Clown Guy got kicked. Relief doesn't cover it. This idiot had gotten me frustrated, angry, and eventually verging on upset. I was just so freaking relieved that the others had finally seen what a toxic, horrible individual he was. We only had one or two more games after that, with some random killer we'd been hooked up with via the game's matchmaking system. Then after that, I went to bed. But as I was reveling in affection for my regular gamer friends, I forgot to do one little thing that would separate me and Clown Guy forever. And the next morning, when I woke up, I found a little red iPhone notification marker for Discord that had a number on it in its high 50s. I should have guessed what it was, or rather, who it was, that had caused so many notifications overnight. But I guess it just didn't quite register in my half-asleep brain. So I opened the app and read the messages. I know I shouldn't have, but it was like seeing a slow-moving car crash or something, and I just couldn't quite peel my eyes away from it, no matter how bad it got. I'll try to type out some of what they said from memory whilst cleaning up the language used a little, and I apologize to anyone in advance who's triggered, offended, or upset by what they say. I bet you're happy now. Can't take on a good killer like me, so you just got your little simp friends to kick me. You shouldn't flatter yourself either. I've seen your profile picture and you're not even all that. You shouldn't be one to refuse any male attention either, because it's not like you have the pick of the bunch. Keep acting like that and you'll die cold and alone, with no one around to care for someone like you. You shouldn't go thinking you're safe either. I spend my life hunting down people like you, both in real life and in that dumb game. I asked enough questions about you when you were offline to figure out exactly where in the UK you live, and if I wanted to, I could be in your city and tracking you down tomorrow. I got the money, the time, and the patience. I will find you if I want to. And when I do, you'll pray for death before the end. Scholars will tell stories of the horrors I subject you to for generations. I'll put the names of Bundy, Dahmer, and Geen to shame. People will remember your name as a synonym for pain, suffering, and weakness, and my sons and daughters will touch themselves over the trophies I take from you and your broken, bleeding body. You should have blocked me when you had the chance, Ruby, but it appears you've been too dumb to do so, and now it's too late. I see you don't have a VPN either. It was far too easy for me to find your IP address, and now it's just a matter of time before I have your exact location, your full name, your family's name, and your friends' names. I will know your neighborhood like the back of my hand by the time I make it there, and you'll never escape me, no matter how hard you try. It went on and on like that, just a tirade of terrifying threats and misogynistic abuse. And the worst thing is, I couldn't help but picture him doing it, all in that horrendous clown outfit that his character wore. And what I just wrote wasn't even half of it. The language he used, The things he threatened to do with me got way, way worse, and I don't want to repeat any of it. I don't want him having the satisfaction of knowing he got to me so badly, to the point where I just stayed offline for a few days after having blocked him. I got myself a VPN almost right away, and I'm hoping that's going to protect me, along with hoping all of his threats of hacking were just a bunch of bluster. But yeah, there it is. The most terrifying thing that ever happened to me while I was using Discord. In fact, it's probably the scariest thing that's happened to me online. Full stop. Probably the scariest thing that ever happened to me, actually. If anything, I'd like to serve as a warning to other gamers who happen to be female, and I hate the term gamer girls. As soon as a guy even shows the remotest signs of being pervy, possessive, or anything like that, hit that block button. God knows it'll save you a whole world of anxiety, like it did for me. A few years ago, I was part of a True Scary Stories server on Discord. It was a place where people would share their own personal stories of scary or spooky things that happened to them in their lives, and for a while it was honestly a lot of fun. Sure, a lot of the stories sounded made up and generally involved stuff like I saw a shadow figure at the end of my bed and other stuff that sounded like they were lifted straight out of a bad horror movie. But every so often someone would share a story that didn't have a hint of the supernatural in it, something that was actually believable, and occasionally these stories were genuinely terrifying. I've read a lot of seriously spine-chilling stuff on that server, but a lot of it I've forgotten over the years, probably because although they were creepy, they just weren't disturbing enough to actually stick with me. But there was one story in particular that I've never forgotten, because it's genuinely made me shudder to read. I hope the user in question doesn't mind if I share their story, and if they happen to read this, I'd like to think that they could let me know in the comments and maybe correct anything I got wrong, because I'm telling this from memory. But anyway, here goes. The poster began their story by assuring us that their story wasn't just some fabrication, and although they were pretty young when it happened, just thinking or writing about it as an adult was a pretty stressful experience for them. They went on to explain that their early years were marred by tragedy, how their dad had died when they were real young from a drug overdose, so they were raised by a single mom living in a small apartment just down the street from their grandma's place. Mom did some dating, though, obviously trying to do the right thing and find them a stepdad to give them some kind of father figure in their life. The incident in question happened while she was out on a date. Usually speaking, their grandma would babysit for them anytime Mom needed to go do anything that meant she couldn't bring them along. But on the night of her date, the grandma was working, so although it wasn't ideal, 9 or 10-year-old storyteller was left unsupervised in their mom's ground floor apartment. Sounds kinda irresponsible at first, but the storyteller was quick to reassure the members of the server that this was back when Yu-Gi-Oh was popular. As long as they had their cards and a box set of cartoons to keep them occupied, being left alone for like an hour or two certainly wasn't an issue for them. It's not like they were going to wander out of the apartment or get up to any mischief while their precious Yu-Gi-Oh was keeping them busy. But at some point during the evening, they're sitting there playing with their cards and watching TV when they heard a tapping on the window. Remember, they lived in the ground floor apartment, so pretty much anyone could have just walked up and started tapping on the glass. No climbing or levitating or any of that stuff was involved, so there was nothing inherently worrying or creepy about someone knocking on the glass. The storyteller then gets up, walking towards the window before drawing back the curtains, only to reveal the face of a complete stranger. Not their grandfather, not their uncle, but a complete and utter stranger. Surprised and confused, they back off from the window, letting the curtains slide back into place before this horrendous crash sounds. Broken glass tumbles onto the carpet at the foot of the curtains, before another smash sends more glittering shards onto the floor in front of them. At that point, they said they just tossed their Yu-Gi-Oh cards onto the floor and bailed, rushing out of the back door of the apartment and over to a neighbor's house, pounding on the door in a state of abject terror as they looked over their shoulder every so often to ensure the mysterious predator wasn't hot in pursuit. But thankfully, the neighbor answers the door, lets our storyteller in, before taking the time to calm them down to get the full story out of them. Naturally, they called the cops immediately, who rushed over since they were given the description of a home invasion in progress. The neighbor then gets in touch with the storyteller's mom to let them know the awful news, who immediately rushes home to comfort their terrified son. Then after that, both the neighbor and storyteller's mom accompany them back to the apartment, where the cops are still searching the property and surrounding area for any sign of the attempted intruder. Apparently, one of the cops approaches the mom at this point and shows her something in a clear plastic evidence bag. Mom stares at it, turns pale, then kneels down and hugs our storyteller tight, fighting to hold back tears as the neighbor guy is just like, my God. They both ended up staying at the grandma's place for like a week after while the window was repaired. And if that seemed like a bizarre amount of time to fix a window and that something else might be behind them staying away from the apartment for a while, you'd be right in thinking that. Our storyteller had their suspicions for a little while, but they were too young to really understand the implications of what had happened. The kind of danger they'd been in wasn't clear until many years later, when their mom explained to them just what happened that evening. You see, it wasn't just the window that was being replaced. The entire apartment was being fitted with new, incredibly sturdy locks, CCTV cameras, just about everything short of a panic room, all being paid for by Grandma and Grandpa. The whole family was absolutely terrified, and it was all down to the piece of evidence that the cops showed to the mom that night, the little thing in the clear plastic evidence baggie that made her turn ashen and squeeze our storyteller in a big, trembling bear hug. What was in that plastic bag was a photograph. A photograph of a young boy curled up in bed, sleeping soundly, and that boy was our storyteller. The mom told a much older storyteller that the photo couldn't have been taken long before the attempted break-in. Something about the sheets on the bed being fairly new or something. I can't quite remember. Or maybe it was a new haircut storyteller had gotten. But either way, it was some detail in there that made it clear that the attempted intruder had broken into the apartment somehow, maybe only a week prior, and taken a photograph of our storyteller while they slept. I can only imagine they had done so to several other children too, making a little catalog of potential victims, perusing them for hours on end before finally deciding on one they'd like the most. I think that's what made my blood run cold back when I read their story. The idea that the intruder had taken this perverse liking to them, one that was strong enough for them to be unable to resist their urges, or whatever kind of sick, twisted desires had them smashing that window in that evening. The family only felt safe again when they heard the news that the creeper, whose M.O. was eerily similar to their own experiences, was caught by police and jailed after being extradited to another state. But they kept the whole thing a secret from our storyteller until he was in his late teenage years. There was no more details after that. There wasn't any grand conclusion, just that it was something that had haunted him for years. I never read anything as horrifying as that on that Discord server. It made everything else seem tame in comparison, and I stopped reading shortly afterward. It's weird how we seek out scary stories sometimes, just to give ourselves a little thrill, but end up being genuinely traumatized, not by the spooky skeleton stories, but by things that we know could have easily happened for real. I used to play a lot of Insurgency Sandstorm with a fixed set of guys and a few girls, and we used to organize using a Discord server. People came and went as time went by, but there were a couple of us that actually stayed in touch quite frequently outside of just organizing gaming sessions and became pretty good friends. Insurgency, for those that haven't played it, is one of those hyper-realistic military shooters that tends to get really intense and occasionally downright terrifying when it's at its best. I'm not saying we had this proper Band of Brothers vibe going. I know it's only a video game, but like I said, a handful of us ended up being pretty good friends and bonding over the intense level of teamwork required to win rounds, not to mention the sweaty-palmed, adrenaline-fueled firefights. One of these was a lad named Colin. One day, Colin tells us that he wouldn't be playing Insurgency for a little while because he had taken a job teaching English as a foreign language out in Indonesia. He had wanted to do some traveling for a while, but just didn't have the money available to him, and getting qualified to teach English gave him an opportunity to see some more exotic areas of the world whilst getting paid for it. We were pretty gutted to hear the news. He was one heck of a sniper, and many a time we'd been pinned down by some enemy machine gunner, only for the gunfire to stop suddenly, followed by a little laugh from Colin and a "have that" in his Scottish accent. We absolutely loved him for moments like that, but we were also really happy for him. And since he promised to stay in the Discord server, we'd be able to keep in touch and hear some stories of his adventures out in the tropics. So a few months go by, and we're enjoying hearing the stories of his travels, along with being updated with photos of him exploring some pretty remote parts of Indonesia. It was the photos of him with the school kids he was teaching that really made me smile, though. He looked like he was having the time of his life, especially when we saw some videos of him teaching the kids some pretty obscure English phrases. Not only that, but occasionally we'd hear some of the kids actually repeat the phrases back kind of in a Scottish accent, and the idea of a bunch of Indonesian kids learning to speak English with an Edinburgh accent was absolutely hilarious to us. I mean, imagine it. Some American wishing an Indonesia fellow good morning or something, only to hear, "You alright, pal? Who's it going?" in response still makes me chuckle, even now, to be honest. Then, in September of 2018, I woke up to the news that there had been an earthquake in the sea just off the coast of Indonesia, causing an earthquake that had resulted in a massive tsunami that had destroyed huge sections of the country. Immediately, I thought of Colin. I jumped onto Discord using the app on my phone and sent him a message asking him if everything was alright and hoping he'd not been caught up in the tsunami. Obviously, there was a huge 7 or 8 hour time difference between the UK and Southeast Asia, and occasionally Colin didn't reply for hours, so the fact that he didn't immediately reply wasn't a massive concern to me. But he didn't reply all that day, to the point where I started expressing concerns to some of the other lads in the server, sharing the news of the tsunami with them and mentioning that I was worried Colin had been caught up in it. We knew from the news stories about which areas of Indonesia had been affected, but we didn't know exactly where Colin was, only that it was in some remote areas and didn't always have immediate access to Wi-Fi, another reason for us to not immediately worry. But he didn't reply the next day either, or the day after that, and it got to the point where a week had gone by and we'd heard nothing back from him. No one had seen Colin, even online, since we got news of the tsunami. And that's when we really started to worry, and as the days went by, we got more and more frightened that something had happened to him. It's around then that I started going back through some of the messages he'd been sending over the previous month or so. He'd been all over Indonesia, and had spent his first few weeks in the capital city of Jakarta, which had remained relatively unaffected by the earthquake and subsequent tsunami. But then I found out that he'd traveled to a place called Palu to teach English there, and as far as I could tell, that's where he'd been at the time of the disaster when it struck. I then cross-referenced the name of the place with any stories about the tsunami, and found out that it had been one of the worst affected by a destructive tidal wave that apparently reached 23 feet in height. 23 feet of rushing water that had destroyed pretty much everything in its path and caused the deaths of over 15,000 people, and in all likelihood, Colin had been one of them. We were devastated, but the worst part is, even to this day, we still have not had any closure about it. We knew Colin quite well, but he kept his online and personal life pretty separate. We never knew his last name or the names of any of his family, so it's not like we could get in touch with them to find out if he really had died or not, or to see about any funeral arrangements if he had indeed perished during the tsunami. But I think the fact that even now his Discord account lies inactive is evidence of the fact that he did actually lose his life out there. Maybe he's okay, and he just never bothered to get back on Discord. Maybe his close encounter with death made him realize that video games were just a waste of time or something. But I think that's just wishful thinking on my part. In my heart of hearts, I know he's probably dead. I just hope he's at peace now, and whatever family he had are okay. Rest in peace, Colin. We still miss you.
When I was 15, I was a bit of a daredevil and was full of that dumb teenage bravado. Living in a small town in Iowa, it got really boring sometimes, so all it took was a simple dare from one of my friends to spend the night at the local bowling alley to to have me sneaking up one of the drop ceiling tiles in the men's restroom, waiting until the place emptied out, then drop down to explore the empty building, like some kind of urban explorer. This would have been around 2005. I knew if I went through with it, rumors would begin to circulate around school, and I would be the cool kid for a while. As pathetic as that sounds, that was our version of clout in those days. We picked a Friday night. As I mentioned before, the entry point was the men's restroom. The ceiling tiles above one of the stalls popped loose easily enough. I had scoped it out during open bowling night the week before. I shimmied up with a small flashlight and crawled onto a wooden platform by the AC ducting and waited. The leagues ran late that night, but by 11 p.m., the last stragglers were gone. The lights were dimmed, and the place became as quiet as a tomb. When I didn't hear any more footsteps, music, or people talking, I pried the tile aside and lowered myself down. I came out of the restroom to an empty building. It was dead quiet. My heart was beating out of my chest because I wasn't entirely sure if all the employees had gone home yet, so I cautiously made my way down the lanes. Slowly. After walking down the length of the building and just kind of stood there for about 10 minutes, I figured I was alone. I didn't hear anything. So then I started to get a little cocky and headed toward the back, past the vending machines, through the door marked employees only, which led to the machines behind the lanes. I had always wondered what they looked like. The pen setter room was narrow and hot. I shined my flashlight around and saw a bunch of metal arms and chains. Pretty underwhelming, to be honest. But that's when I saw something. There was a tall shape standing motionless by the emergency exit. At first, I thought it was a mannequin, but then it moved. I didn't expect anyone to be back there, so I had made no effort to conceal myself. The figure stepped into my light. It was a man, wearing a dark jacket, and I saw in his hand he was holding a single bowling pin by the neck, like a club. I froze. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. When he took another step toward me, I bolted. I ran back through the door, across the open floor. I could hear him behind me, his boots thudding against the ground. "I'll fucking kill you," he shouted. I didn't look back. I just sprinted toward the restrooms. Thankfully, there was also a bar and a dining area near where the restrooms were. From his vantage point, he wouldn't be able to tell which one I had fled to once I rounded the corner. However, I saw a row of wooden stools against the wall. I grabbed one of the stools and hurled it toward him as hard as I could. It caught him in the leg, causing him to fall, and he went down hard. I didn't wait to see if he got back up. I sprinted into the men's room, yanked open the stall door, and hauled myself back into the ceiling, the tile snapping back into place just as I heard the restroom door burst open. I could hear him below me, pacing, muttering. At first, it was just heavy breathing. Then he spoke. "I'm gonna find you. I'll bash your head in." I pressed myself flat, barely breathing. Dust got in my nose and I had to stop myself from sneezing. The next thing the man said was disturbing. "You killed her. I know you killed my daughter. She was right here. And you took her from me." My blood went cold. Daughter? I didn't know what he was talking about. I hadn't killed anyone. He kept going on like that, voice rising and falling, like he was arguing with himself. "You'll pay for it. I'm gonna make you pay." He then banged the pen against the stall doors, one by one. Then, silence. The minutes dragged on. After maybe an hour, there was nothing. I had no idea if he was still down there waiting for me. I had a pretty good spot on the wooden platform, but I couldn't move without making noise. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell asleep right there. I woke up to voices coming from below. The employees were coming in for the morning leagues. I waited for another hour, listening until the place was busy, balls rolling, pins crashing, announcements over the speakers, etc. I carefully slid the tile aside again, making sure the coast was clear, before dropping down. I washed my face real quick to hide how wrecked I looked, and slipped out the side exit into the parking lot. No one batted an eye at me. I told my friends the full story, but no one believed me. They just thought I was trying to make my night in the bowling alley sound more exciting than it was. 2 of my friends were with me when I crawled up into the ceiling, and then hung around until closing time. So they believed that I did go through with the dare, but not the part about the maniac with the bowling pin. When I think back to that night, that man's disturbing murmuring still gives me the fucking creeps. You killed her. You killed my daughter. I don't know who he thought I was, but I'm okay with never finding out. I would hate to end this story like a corny urban legend, and I know it's been like 20 years, but a part of me still wonders if that man still visits that place when the lights go out, waiting in the back room with a bowling pin in his hand. I grew up in Antioch, California, and used to play football in high school. I had planned on making a career out of it, until I had a severe knee injury where my bone was forced out of the socket. Even after I rehabilitated, it was never the same, and it effectively ended my football aspirations. That's when I took up competitive bowling and eventually joined a league. We would often meet up at Delta Bowl and play 3 or 4 games. We would usually wrap things up around 10:30. On the night of December 7th, 2024, we had another league night and things went well. We did hear some loud arguing happening from one of the other lanes, but it had nothing to do with us. By 10:30, the place was emptying out fast. I grabbed my bag, zipped up my jacket, and pushed through the glass doors into the parking lot. My car was halfway down the row. As I was walking towards it, I heard voices rising sharp from the far end, near the perimeter fence. I saw someone in a hoodie standing next to a parked SUV. The man was yelling at someone in the car, sounding like he was threatening violence, and it looked like things were about to get ugly. I didn't stop to listen. It's none of my business. Then a loud pop came from that direction. My stomach dropped, along with the rest of me. More shots rang out. My heart was pounding so loud, it drowned everything else out. I stayed flat for another full minute. When all fell silent, I risked standing. My legs felt like jelly. I saw the hooded man from earlier, lying face down with a gun in his hand. The police showed up a short time later. The shooting was a result of an attempted robbery, which soon turned into a full-blown shootout. I'll paste an excerpt from a local news article about the incident. On the night of December 7th, 2024, a fatal gun battle occurred in the parking lot of the Delta Bowl in Antioch, California, resulting in the death of 2 men. Around 10:35 p.m., Antonio Drake, 34, was sitting in the driver's seat of his vehicle, preparing to leave the bowling alley, when DeAndre Reed, 35, approached Drake's vehicle. Investigators later determined Reed was attempting to rob Drake. An exchange of gunfire ensued between the 2 men. Both were fatally wounded in the encounter. There is no prior connection. Surveillance videos and evidence indicate that Drake and Reed did not know each other and had no conflict while inside the bowling alley. The Antioch Police Department classified the incident as an isolated attempted robbery because Drake was firing in response to being robbed. His shooting of DeAndre Reed is considered an act of self-defense, justifiable homicide. End of excerpt. It's interesting to me that several of the articles written about this case make this sound like it was a one-on-one isolated incident. The part about them having no conflict while inside the bowling alley is not true. News reports on television told a different version of events. The confrontation began inside the building, between 2 groups. Drake was a part of Group A, and Reed was a part of Group B. They were apparently bowling next to each other when an argument broke out between the 2 groups. when it was time to leave. Reed then followed Drake to his car and tried to rob him. That's when the gunfire broke out. I was there that night, and I did hear the arguing coming from a few lanes down from us, and I personally saw Reed standing next to the SUV, shouting at who I assumed to be Drake, the driver. This is yet another case of senseless violence that has been escalating around here. The locals used to consider the bowling alley to be a safe haven from the violence that has plagued our streets. Not anymore. This happened back in 2003, when I was 19 and working as a busboy at Unity Lanes in Zephyrhills, Florida. It was one of those old school bowling alleys, and is one of the only places Zephyrhills has to offer in the way of entertainment, which was the case back then as well. The night league was always packed with regulars. I got decent tips, and free pool games on the slower shifts. Nothing ever felt dangerous there, just families and drunks having fun. Friday nights would get a little crazy, but the worst that would happen is we had to throw out some white teenager dropping F-bombs and using the N-word. It was a Tuesday night. I was working the late shift. I would say this was around 9 p.m. The place was almost empty because it wasn't a league night. There were just a few lanes with customers. I was wiping down tables, stacking up chairs, when the manager told me to take 5. I grabbed my pack of Marlboros and slipped out the back door to the alley behind the building, where the dumpster sat against a concrete barrier. The back lot was always dark. There was only a dim light over the door. I lit up and leaned against the wall, taking a long drag. I was sort of zoning out when I heard something rustling inside the dumpster. It wasn't the wind. There was something shifting around in there. I froze. I figured it might be a raccoon or a cat, digging for scraps. But I shouted, "Hello?" Nothing. I shrugged it off and took another puff. Then, the lid of the dumpster flew open, and out she came, like a fucking jack-in-the-box. It was what you could loosely call a woman, maybe late 30s, wild hair matted with God knows what, eyes wide, and clothes filthy and torn. She had that emaciated look that crack addicts have, and she was screaming, a high-pitched wail that cut right through me. In her hand, she held a kitchen knife. She charged at me, full sprint, full banshee. The cigarette fell from my mouth. I didn't think, I just reacted, and shoved her hard with both hands, which sent her flying backward, and she fell hard on the asphalt, knife clattered away. I heard her cursing at me as I bolted back inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it. "Somebody call the cops, now! Some crazy lady just jumped out of the dumpster with a knife!" Bystanders were looking at me like I was nuts, so I repeated myself. "I'm not joking. Some woman came out of the dumpster with a knife, and she just tried to fucking stab me." Cops arrived maybe 10 minutes later, lights flashing. They searched the back lot, but the dumpster was empty, and the woman was nowhere to be found. Lou, the manager, covered the rest of my shift after I was done giving my statement, and sent me home early. I was pretty shaken up about the whole thing. I found out that a couple of hours after the cops were called, they tracked her down a few blocks away, hiding in an abandoned shed in someone's backyard. She was a local repeat offender, drug addict, and had multiple arrests for animal abuse, starving dogs, and much worse. And get this, she attacked someone else a month earlier, slashed a guy in a gas station parking lot, over him not giving her money. That one got her on probation, but after this, they revoked it, and tacked on an assault with a deadly weapon charge. She ended up with a 5-year prison sentence. I never saw her again, and it was this incident that helped me quit smoking for good. Unity Lanes is still there to this day. It's been rebranded and completely remodeled from when I worked there. For the longest time, this was the only hangout spot for high school kids and 20-something-year-old alcoholics who lived in this town. I got really fed up with the environment of that place, and quit about a year after the dumpster woman incident. The owners apparently got fed up as well, because they started having a police car parked there on Friday nights, and security started kicking out anyone who wasn't there for bowling. I wish that policy was a thing back when I worked there. Anyway, that part of my life is long behind me, but I still get nervous when I'm around dumpsters.
Hey, thanks for taking the time to read my story. I've been sitting on my experience for some time now, and finally decided to share it. Just don't use my real name, okay? It was my niece's 8th birthday party at a place called Tampa Lanes, back when it was still open. It must have been one of the last big events there before everything shut down for good. We had a lane reserved right in the middle of the building, and I was there helping wrangle my niece and her friends, trying to get on their bowling shoes. That's when I first got this very uncomfortable feeling. There was this guy sitting alone at one of the lane tables besides us, wearing a dark jacket, face half hidden in shadow, just staring at me. I caught his gaze once and looked away fast, thinking maybe he was waiting for someone, but every time I glanced back, he was still fixed on me. No movement, no expression, just watching. I tried shaking it off, focusing on the party, giving high fives and cheering for gutter balls and eventually singing happy birthday, but the staring didn't stop. It got so bad that I switched spots and sat with my back to him, but I could still feel his eyes on me. After a while I turned back again. His gaze was still locked on me. Then he crossed the line. He was leaning forward, elbows on the table, then he stuck out his tongue. Slow, deliberate, sliding it across his lips. In this gross, sexual way, my stomach lurched. I didn't scream or make a scene, but my hands shook, and I marched straight to the front counter and told the manager. There's a guy in a hoodie at the tables who has been staring at me nonstop, and he just did something really creepy and inappropriate with his tongue. The manager didn't hesitate. He grabbed his radio and called security. A couple minutes later, they walked the guy out of the building. He didn't resist, just shuffled towards the door with his head down, hoodie covering most of his face. The manager apologized, threw in some free tokens for the arcade as a sorry, and said they banned him from coming back. The party wound down around 5 o'clock. I carried the leftover gift bags to my sister's car and then headed over to my car. That's when I saw 2 police cruisers parked right next to my silver Honda. An officer had someone cuffed and bent over one of the cars. When I got closer, I saw that it was the hooded man, the same one who had been thrown out. Another cop walked up after I asked what was going on.
Ma'am, is this your vehicle?
I nodded, heart pounding. Yeah, what happened? He explained that a family leaving spotted him in the lot with a wire hanger, working it into the driver's side door of my car, trying to pop the lock. They shouted at him, but he ignored them, and just kept trying to unlock the car until they rolled up and arrested him a few minutes later. I stared at the fresh scratches around my door handle. The officer asked if I knew him. I said no, but quickly told him about what happened in the bowling alley earlier. They checked his background. He had priors for harassment, loitering, stuff like that. Nothing super violent, but enough to make my legs feel weak. They took my statement, let me go, and I drove home fast. To this day, I still don't know how he knew which car was mine. We pulled in hours earlier and unloaded cake and gifts with the kids and my sister, and nothing stood out to me, but he must have been there, watching from the lot. Maybe he saw me get out of my car when we first showed up and then followed us inside. I never went back to Tampa Lanes, and it wasn't long after that night it closed down for good, and the building has sat empty for years now. I have to drive by that place on my way to and from work, and every time I do, I wonder what could have happened to me if that man had managed to jimmy the lock on my car.
Growing up, I wasn't a small kid. No, I'm not going to be ashamed to say it. I was fat. Medically, I qualified as obese, and I suffered from some pretty severe depression following my parents' divorce. There was an emptiness in my life when my mom went off and left us, and I filled the void with food. I'm not that person anymore, but I'm not going to be ashamed that I was either. That's the kind of thing that leads down the path that I followed in the first place. And by the time I started high school, I weighed way over 200 pounds and I was very big. I hated gym class and I dreaded the showers even more. It's not like everyone in my grade was some jock or anything like that, but I was by far the biggest boy in freshman year. The only upside to it is that I was a tough little guy as well. The bullies soon gave up on any kind of physical violence against me because I could take it. Shove me against the lockers, I'd just bounce back. Literally too, I guess. Slap my fat rolls, I had a very high pain threshold. Call me fat? Well, yeah, I knew I was. I could hardly deny it. I didn't love hearing it, but just pointing out that I was a big boy only stung internally. And so yeah, I was bullied and it did upset me, but I was great at not showing it, and I think a lot of the kids respected that. There was one kid, though. His name was Neil, and he was as skinny as I was fat. Now, I was pretty short for my age, but he was a whole head shorter than me, a really tiny guy, but he wasn't some adorable little shorty. Neil was a mean one, and no mistake. You could tell from the glint in his eye and the perpetual smirk on his face. And rumor had it that Neil could be such a bully that he once made a senior guy cry. Nobody really seemed to know exactly how Neil was a bully. Kids just knew to be wary of him and keep away from him, and this resulted in a couple of things. One, Neil had no friends. Nobody wanted to actually spend time with him because he was so unpredictable and supposedly volatile. Now sure, people would be polite to him and nod hello in the halls, but nobody wanted to sit with him at lunch or invite him to social events or anything like that. And two, it meant that some of the more physical bullies had it in mind to take Neil down, and that's where I came in. One day I was sitting alone eating lunch in the courtyard because, like Neil, I also didn't have any actual friends, and so who should come and sit beside me but Neil himself? He asked if I wanted half of his sandwich, and to be honest, it did look really delicious. I really didn't know what to do. Neil, this famous idiot, was offering me food. Was there some catch to it? Like it was filled with razor blades or something? In the end, I decided that I was more scared of what would happen if I said no, so I took the sandwich. And this seemed to make Neil happy, and even more so when I actually ate it. I didn't really know what to say after that, so I just sort of asked him if he was having a good day. Neil ignored my question and told me that he had a proposal for me. Neil basically proposed that I act as his bodyguard, and in exchange, he'd make sure that I wasn't the target of bullies. I told him I wasn't really bullied anymore these days, and he grinned, that sort of snide grin that he had, and pointed out that this was because he had left me alone so far. It was a good point. Neil had never bullied me, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to find out what would happen if he did. And so I agreed to be his friend and bodyguard, and this arrangement somehow lasted all the way to junior year. Neil used me to cause all kinds of trouble. He'd pick on certain kids, really vile stuff, and then have me threaten to fight them, or in most cases, take any blows that would have been aimed at him. Sometimes he'd force me to beat up younger kids, younger than myself, as we got older. In junior year in particular, we saw a few freshman targets that Neil took great delight in having me hurt. Now you may be wondering how Neil managed to have such a hold over me, especially since I wasn't that particularly thin-skinned. Well, Neil managed to find that chink in my armor, my mom. Anytime I tried to push back against Neil or deny him, then he'd throw a barb my way about how my mother had left because of her disgusting fat son and her autistic daughter and her fat arsler husband. Neil also seemed to know pretty intimate details of the man my mother had run off with and what she was doing now. When I asked Dad about this, he got really quiet and just sort of asked me who I'd heard this from, which was all the answer I needed. Neil was able to use my mother against me quite often, and that hurt. It really hurt. And so I took the path of the coward. I chose to hurt other people instead of letting Neil hurt me. And I know this makes me a bad person. I regret all of it, but it is what it is now. And like I said, I'm going to call things as they are, although in this case, yes, I am ashamed of who I was. Neil's influence over me almost ruined my high school career as well. My report cards went steadily downhill. Dad never punished me, he just got kind of sad. One time, he was a little bit drunk and he asked where he was going wrong with me and what he could do to help me to get back on track. And it just about broke my heart. And instead of facing up to that, I said something incredibly mean to him that I still apologize for to this day. I told him he could stop being such an embarrassing loser. Now meanwhile, I developed a reputation at school for being a bully and someone to avoid, so Neil was my only friend really for years. And somehow, Neil managed to twist things so it looked like I was the ringleader and he was my sidekick, so any trouble we got into, it was usually me who took the brunt of it. I remember one time, Neil persuaded me to scratch up the paint on the car belonging to one of the most popular seniors in school. If this guy had caught me, I think he was one of the few people in the school who would actually outdo me in a fight, and he would have pummeled me into the ground. Thankfully, we got away with that one. Towards the end of junior year, Neil developed a crush. The girl in question was an unassuming, bookish girl who was quiet and kept to herself. You know the type. Now, she was also the girl that I'd had a crush on for the last year as well, and I'm pretty sure that Neil knew this. Neil told me that he had a plan to ask her to date him. He just needed some time with her in the art classroom, and I had to stand guard to make sure nobody came along and unlocked the door. Now, I might have been a dumb kid, but I wasn't stupid. I knew that there was absolutely nothing good about what Neil might have planned, and so this one time, I said no. And Neil went nuts. Apparently, there were a lot of things that he'd been holding back, things that he knew about my mom, and according to him anyway, how my stepdad had been abusing my sister. And then he had all this evidence on his phone of my involvement and all the bullying, cut and edited in a way that looked like I was the sole culprit. In particular, there was minutes of footage of me vandalizing the senior's car. Neil threatened to reveal this to them and to reveal to the whole school the kind of loose woman my mother was and how she was allegedly pimping out her own daughter. And at that moment, I saw red. By this point, a lot of my fat had turned into muscle and I had a huge growth spurt. Neil was still tiny. I picked my bully up by the waist. I slammed him down on a table into the empty classroom we were conspiring in. And the crack I heard was almost as terrifying as Neil's screams. I knew I'd done something really, really terrible, something even Neil didn't deserve. And when it all came out, I didn't protect Neil, but I didn't try to protect myself either. I deserved a lot of the blame and I wanted to take it. After this, being sent to a military academy was my own choice. I'd scared myself stupid with my own rage, and I'd hurt people and I'd gotten out of control. Neil's family wanted to press charges, and the military academy also served as a compromise. And this is also how I found out that the man my mother had left the family for was Neil's father. This whole time, my new stepdad was Neil's biological dad who walked out on Neil's family when Neil was just a baby. And I can only guess that the whole thing was intended as some sort of roundabout revenge against me in the end. Military school was the making of me, really. And I took it like a duck to water. I graduated and then joined the military, where I'd stay there to this day. I hate the person I used to be, but I'm proud of the person I've become. And I heard that Neil took a very darker path and never tried to better himself. To a larger extent, I blame myself for this. I certainly see him as a victim in many circumstances. I try to make up for who I was every day. I serve our country, I donate to charity, I send money back to my dad to help my sister's care. Thankfully, Neil's claims of abuse towards my sister were lies aimed to disgrace his dad. Apparently, he's not even that bad of a guy. I don't want to know him, though. I just want to keep making amends for allowing one of the most effed up people I've ever known to dictate, dominate, and destroy my childhood. You may finish this story by hating me and thinking I'm a terrible person, and I wouldn't blame you, but I'm trying. I wish Neil had done the same, and from what I understand, he's done some pretty terrible things in the years since I've known him, and I can only hope that one day he takes his first steps onto the road to redemption that I'm attempting to walk myself. You can't take back the things you do, but you can try and make amends for them, even if it's too little and too late. When I was younger, in high school, I admit that I was a bit of a stoner, a sort of emo goth type who probably didn't take care of herself that well and smoked a little too much weed. Now, this was before weed was legal too, so we couldn't just walk to the store and pick some up. We'd spend our weekends hanging out in this sort of cubby hole under a bridge, not like the one from that famous dancing video you probably remember, and we'd turn it into a bit of a hangout space. Rugs, magazines, a battery-powered stereo, the works. Now, one rule was if you showed up, then you brought snacks. And there was one guy who didn't follow that rule, or any of them really, and his name was Birmingham. And that wasn't really his real name. I imagine that, but that's what he insisted we call him. Because get this, he'd been to Birmingham in England once on a vacation for like a month, and there were a bunch of ways Birmingham didn't fit in. He wasn't a goth or emo, he was more of a hippie. And he was this white dude with dreadlocks, although I'm not sure if they were dreads or whether his hair was really just that unkempt. Birmingham would never arrive with snacks either, and he'd never contribute free stuff to the den. He'd just stroll in and hang out while the rest of us put the work in. And while some of us might not have the best kind of hygiene, Birmingham had absolutely reeked of BO, and whoever got stuck sitting next to him, usually one of the girls, would have to develop a tolerance to his smell. Oh, and did I mention that Birmingham was 32? A 32-year-old stinking hippie hanging out with high school goths and emos, and he was not shy about hitting on some of the girls in the group. So, you're probably asking, why did we tolerate him? And the answer was simple. We were young, dumb, and he would buy us alcohol and provide us with weed. For a price, mind you, which he made no secret about skimming a profit from. He'd just shown up one day, told us that he could hook us up just as we'd been wondering how the hell to get into substance abuse. Spoiler, just don't, and he sort of just stuck around ever since. And so Birmingham, despite all of his flaws and age gap and being a creep, was very much always at our hangout. He acted like he was the king of the castle and we were his adoring servants, especially the women. Even though all of us resisted his quote-unquote charms, he behaved as if we constantly lusted after his stinky-ass body. He was gross, to put it mildly, and we were dumb enough to let him stick around anyways. And there were maybe 8 of us, including Birmingham, on and off, 4 girls, 3 high school guys, and this Birmingham guy. 2 of the guys were far too of losers to really ever stand up against him, and one of them was as much of a predator creep as Birmingham was. So between Birmingham and this other weirdo, whose name was Josh, us girls really had to watch ourselves. We just moved into junior year when Birmingham ramped up his behavior. He singled out a couple of the girls, they were named Sandy and Bridget, and started trying to get them to engage in some really strange actions with him. At first he offered free joints in exchange for this, and then it was an entire free baggie of weed, and then it was weed and unspecified pills. He must have been really desperate to get touched, as that's all he was aiming for, to start with anyway. And a rumor went around that Sandy did actually give in and even did some strange stuff with him for a bag of weed, and we didn't see her for about a week. And when she came back to the group, she seemed down and ashamed and wouldn't look anyone in the eye, and we got the impression that whatever experience she'd had with him had not been a good one. And knowing how pressurizing Birmingham could get, I could only imagine. Now, none of us wanted to bring it up with Sandy in case it wasn't that, but behind her back, most of the boys were not sympathetic, especially Josh, while obviously the girls felt bad for her. And we began talking about how to get rid of this Birmingham, but the boys were having none of it. He was our free ticket to weed and alcohol, and we weren't losing that just because Sandy wanted a freebie. These little assholes. I'm not going to pretend Sandy was innocent in this whole affair, but if you knew Birmingham, you'd know how far he'd tried to go to get what he wanted. And the fact that it had taken until now was a miracle. The thing that changed everything was when this new girl joined junior year and quickly became a member of our group. Her name was Summer, and ironically she had almost jet black hair, completely natural, and she soon became one of us, and Birmingham was smitten, and so was Josh. This was the first rift. Summer was one of those girls who was confident and she dressed provocatively, but she had no interest in doing anything with a dude, and so began a competition between Josh and Birmingham to be the first one to get Summer without clothes. They weren't trying to sleep with her, not yet anyway. They just made a bet to be the first one to consensually see her, and the consensual part wasn't out of respect or anything, it was just for bragging rights between these 2 weirdos. Naturally, Summer didn't appreciate this from the start, having 2 guys, one of whom was literally 32 and stank, trying to get her to do something like flashing, and she began asking some of us privately why we tolerated this weirdo, and so we explained. And then she asked why we tolerated Josh, and we started realizing that there really wasn't actually a good reason for that. He was a creepy idiot too, but he normally targeted girls outside the group. There were all sorts of rumors circulating about the way he'd treated past girlfriends. Summer decided she'd try to handle it, and her solution was to offer some kind of vague incentive to Josh or Birmingham, to whichever one beat the other in a fight. And very clearly beat, no question that they'd won, i.e., she meant one of them to put the other in the hospital. Summer had expected them to say no, that it wasn't worth it, but apparently this high school boy and this 32-year-old man were willing to risk killing each other over seeing some girl's body, and so it was decided that the fight would be that Friday night. Summer had become my personal best friend, really, so she was panicking to me on the telephone about this. And of course she didn't want anyone to get hurt, she just wanted both of them to just screw off. We couldn't think of any solutions other than to try and de-escalate the fight or call the cops if we really had to. And ultimately, none of that needed to happen. We all showed up to the hangout on Friday. Birmingham made some disgusting crude comment about how he was going to win the fight and Summer would be compelled to do all sorts of unspeakable things. And that's when he attacked. Only the attack didn't come from Josh. Now remember I said the other two guys who were too much of babies to ever stand up against Birmingham? Well, it turns out that wasn't true. One of them, a guy named Craig, suddenly went flying across the room, slamming Birmingham against the concrete wall of the hangout and pinning him there by the throat. Craig was a big guy, tall and large, and he had no problem holding this skinny, wiry Birmingham guy in place. And it all came out. How much we all hated Birmingham, and how he was a stinking, vile parasite who could only get with women by trying to bribe children with drugs. How none of us could stand him, basically everything we'd ever wanted to say to him. You see, we found out later that Craig had been developing a burning, powerful crush on Summer, and the more Birmingham and Josh talked about her like that, the more quietly and fuming he got. And then he just snapped. We watched in silent awe as Craig headbutted Birmingham square in his nose, audibly breaking it, and we listened as he threatened to gut him violently if he ever showed his face around the hangout again, or even around town. And then he pulled the hunting knife out of his belt. That's the exact moment Josh walked in, looking sick and nervous, presumably for his fight. You'd expect this to distract Craig, but it didn't. He held the knife up to Birmingham's throat so tightly that it drew beads of blood and told him how serious he truly was. And then Craig dropped some info we didn't know. He mentioned the name of his family, a well-known Irish-American gang in town who were, to say the least, serious business. And when Birmingham heard that, that's what finally broke him. He began to cry, begging forgiveness and apologizing to Craig. And Craig said it wasn't him who deserved the apology, it was Summer. And Summer just shook her head and said she didn't care, she just wanted this guy out of there. So Craig let him limp away, and that was the last we ever saw of that creepy drug dealer again. Now meanwhile, Josh had been watching the whole thing with a sort of sick look on his face, as I said, and Craig turned to him, tucked the knife back into his belt, and just gave him this look that sort of said, "You could be next." And the group kind of dissipated after that. Nobody really had the energy to hang out with each other with all that violence hanging in the air, and Summer and I stayed friends, and the other girls and guys sort of drifted away. We're still friends to this day, and sometimes Summer and I talk about how we were regularly hanging out with 3 different guys who were scary in their own way. And there was Josh, who I later found out got kicked out of college for his conduct with a female student, and then there was Birmingham, who, looking back, was more terrifying than I truly realized, an adult male trying to use intoxicants to get underage women into bed with him. And while he was maybe the least dangerous, Craig was definitely the scariest. Nothing suggested he'd explode that day, and nothing gave away that he was the black sheep of an extremely violent family. And all we can be grateful for is that Craig's first outburst of rage was directed at the right target. When I was growing up during high school, we had a quiet kid in class. You know the type that I'm talking about. This was post-Columbine, so quiet kid jokes were told, but kind of in a whispered tone. Nobody wanted to actually trigger the quiet kid or generally cause anything really bad to happen, and Kenny never actually showed serious signs of violence. Well, mostly anyway. Occasionally some of the cool kids would give him crap and he'd lash out and sort of yell at them, and whenever he got angry, His voice became incomprehensible, which really didn't help with people calling him an R-word or slow or a prospective danger to society. Now, a few things about Kenny that were actually true. His mom cut his hair in a bowl cut, and the 2000s you'd think that she'd absolutely have to know that this was going to bring the wrath of 1,000 high schoolers down on him. And he also carried a Spider-Man backpack at all times, one from the animated series, and it was before people thought things like this were retro and cool, and so that was another reason people dunked on poor Kenny. He could barely communicate if you spoke to him. He'd spend so long thinking about what you said that it felt like he was almost ignoring you, and you had to learn to just stand there and wait, and eventually Kenny would reply. Most times, anyway. Sometimes he really would just zone out, and you'd have to sort of yell his name to snap him back to attention. Now, looking back, Kenny shouldn't really have been in school with regular kids, or if he was, he should have had some kind of helper or something. And instead, this probably autistic, probably mentally ill kid was just left to fend for himself in the Thunderdome that is high school. I was so relieved when the new kid, Bradley, joined the school, and he was one of those tall, blonde, wholesome American boys who got along well with pretty much everybody. He excelled at sports, he was smart, the works, and I might have been a little jealous, I gotta admit. And so Bradley became friends with basically everyone in no time, but of all the people he hung around the most, it was Kenny. And I guess you could say that he took him under his wing, but it didn't feel patronizing or protective or anything like that. He really brought Kenny out of his shell. It turns out that when he wasn't ostracized and constantly made fun of, Kenny was actually pretty funny, pretty smart guy. He was deeply intelligent and he was an absolute whiz at chess, and so was Bradley. And Bradley slowly integrated Kenny into various friendship groups. And for his part, Kenny, shockingly, integrated right back. And it was like this strange, unique, beautiful kid had been waiting beneath the surface for someone like Bradley to evolve him. And it was absolutely, utterly tragic that it just couldn't last. Now one day, I came in a little too late to school because I didn't have class first period, and as soon as I got there, I could tell some commotion was going on. Cops were there, and it looked like they were searching lockers, Kenny's locker in particular. I watched as they bagged something up and removed it from the premises, and shortly after that, a sniffling, crying Kenny was marched down the corridor in handcuffs. Now here's the story we were told. Bradley, as his best friend, had discovered that Kenny was planning to dose the food in the school cafeteria with some type of poison. This plan had been underway since well before Bradley joined the school, but instead of making the most of his newfound popularity, Kenny decided to go ahead with it anyway. Bradley had seen the poison in Kenny's locker and, despite his friendship with Kenny, couldn't let this slide and reported it to the school. One kid's dad was high up in the force and kind of snuck a look at the notes on the investigation, and it looked like they didn't have much on Kenny. He was claiming he didn't even know what that substance was. And then Bradley found the manifesto. It had been hidden behind a false wall in Kenny's locker that he had, and Bradley had somehow dug it out, and it detailed Kenny's plan to poison the food and how on the same day he was going to bring 3 pistols to school belonging to his dad and finish anyone off that way. Bradley brought this manifesto straight to the dean, and I guess he really hadn't thought this through. 1, why was Bradley able to access Kenny's locker, find that wall, and discover this manifesto when the cops didn't? 2, Kenny's dad had died many years ago, and while that didn't rule out the idea of him owning guns, he had been a staunch anti-gun campaigner, so the idea of Kenny accessing his father's guns seemed ridiculous. 3, the manifesto was supposedly written before Bradley even came to the school, but the food that Kenny claimed he was going to poison had not been on the menu until that year. Naturally, this made the school authorities and the cops suspicious. Kenny had been suspended from school at the time since there was no actual proof he planned on committing a crime, and then the next thing we knew, Bradley was no longer in attendance either. It turns out Brad was a psychopath who had been kicked out of his last school for antisocial behavior. His father owned an exterminator firm that specialized in killing rats. One of the few remaining uses of that poison is in rat poison. Kenny would not have been able to get his hands on that type of stuff easily. Bradley would have. And eventually, with warrants served, the cops were able to prove that bottles of this stuff were missing from Bradley's dad's inventory. And not only that, They were able to get access to the family computer, and what they found was very damning: a saved file containing the whole manifesto. According to the kid, whose dad was one of the lead detectives, Bradley broke down and sang like a canary. Not a remorseful one, but a proud one. When he arrived at the school and first saw Kenny and heard the quiet kid jokes, he was curious. He wanted to know what kind of punishment would be dealt out to someone who might be a school-based criminal, and he was curious about the effect it'd have on Kenny. Rumor has it that when asked, Bradley coldly admitted that he was curious if Kenny would commit some kind of act against himself. You know what I mean? I don't know exactly what happened to Bradley. He was expelled, but I'm not sure what kind of criminal charges were brought against him. His father doubled down on the misplaced poison having nothing to do with his son, and so we never saw Bradley again. And we never saw Kenny either. The whole incident broke him, and I wish I could say that he'd overcome his experiences, returned to school, and been embraced by us again. I know we would have welcomed him back, but Bradley broke him. Kenny spent the rest of his high school career in some kind of mental institute, and for all I know, he's still there. I've tried to find him a few times, but I've never been successful. And on the chance that you're living your best life, Kenny, and also somehow hear this, I wish you the best. Bradley, you seem to be a psychopath, and I hope you ended up locked away for the safety of everyone. Spending my teenage years around someone like you was the most chilling and horrific thing possible, and the way you tortured poor Kenny is unforgivable. Adults can be awful, but kids can be truly, truly evil.
The story happened late October of 2022. It was my senior year of high school. My girlfriend Jade and I decided to go to a party that was to celebrate our football season, which had recently just ended. I had played football for 8 years at this point, and Jade had been doing cheerleading for 10 years. We felt like we should attend to give a proper send-off to our respective sports. Plus, I knew the host pretty well. We'll call him Jake, because he was also on the team and he had the house all to himself. The plan was for me to be the designated driver for Jade, my friend who we'll call Michael, and his girlfriend who we'll call Morgan, who are also coming along with us. Michael lives 2 cities away. Him and his family moved his senior year, and he decided to just finish high school in our city. Besides the main downtown area that's our state capital, our cities aren't very big, so Michael was only a 20-minute drive. This is important for later. Halloween was right around the corner, so that was the theme of the party. I went as Jack Skellington, just wearing the suit, and had Jane do my makeup to look like a skeleton while she went as Sally. Michael went as Chucky, and Morgan went as his bride. I'm like 90% sure her name is Tiffany, but if I'm wrong, I apologize. Anyways, we go to the party and a lot more people than I expected showed up. Basically the entire cheer squad, almost the entire football team, and even people from our rival high school, their football team and their cheer squad there as well. And like what you would expect from a typical high school party. People didn't know how to control their drinking, and well, things got really rowdy. I was playing a tag team beer pong game with Michael against 2 other friends when a familiar voice called my name. I turned to look, and it was a kid from our high school who we'll call Bob, wearing a Jason mask and his usual hoodie with jeans. Now, Bob was an odd specimen to say the least. I met him in my first term history class when he randomly came up to me and started talking to me. From the start, I could tell that he wasn't very good at socializing. Being on the football team, people expect me to be stuck up, but I try to be very open and nice with everyone, so I got to know him pretty well in that class. A little too well, in fact. He would openly tell me and my other friends in class about his frustrations about being single and a virgin, and how desperate he was to lose his virginity. He also didn't really know how to read a room or pick up on social cues. He also would talk like we've been buddies forever, and would make really unusual or out-of-pocket jokes. He also had really well-off parents. Both of them drove sports cars, and he lived in a huge house. Despite this though, he would wear the same clothes almost every day and had really long, greasy hair. He would also start high-fiving me in the hallway, which wasn't a big deal because it was just one more person to high-five on my way to class. Well, not long after that, I knew someone who went to junior high with him, and Jade told me how he had the biggest crush on her in junior high. and how he was only trying to be friendly with me to get closer to her. That didn't make much sense to me at the time, so I tried not to look at him differently, but the thought had always lingered in my head. Especially since when he would high-five me, Jade was always there, and he would try to stick around a little longer and always include himself in the conversation. Again, I had no problem with this, especially because he wasn't stalking me 24/7. It's just at times I found it mildly annoying and creepy. He started small talk and I had tried to answer his questions as much as I could, but to be honest, I was way more focused on the beer pong game. He left me alone after a while. The party started to die down and I was sitting in a circle with some teammates reminiscing over our times on the team and talking about how we'd really miss it when I decided to rally my group and head out. Jade was sitting in a circle of her own with the cheer team maybe 5 feet away from me, probably doing the same thing, so gathering her wasn't that hard. The hard ones to find were Michael and his girlfriend. I tried calling Michael, but he didn't answer, and I didn't have his girlfriend's number. Our first assumption was that they were probably just making out or something in a bedroom. So we went about the house knocking on door to door, opening them and seeing if there was anyone there, then shutting the door. Bob saw me and Jade appear into our room and close the door when he then came up to us and said, "Whoa, what are you guys trying to do in there?" in a joking tone that just came off as creepy and awkward. I asked him if he'd seen our friend and he just replied no, so we kept looking. Bob then started following us around, which I was starting to get annoyed with. I eventually found Michael in the bathroom puking his guts out in the toilet with his girlfriend. While he was finishing up, I went to my friend Jank and thanked him for his hospitality, and I offered to come over the next day to help him clean up. He said it was okay, that he actually had some people spending the night, including his girlfriend, who was going to help him in the morning. I still told him I would stop by if he needed help. But we're heading to my car when I had then heard Bob say, "Hey man, could you give me a ride?" I was a little annoyed because I was already pretty tired, and I already had to drive out of the way to drop off Michael, Morgan, and Jade, but I just said yes anyways because I'm nice. I also didn't mind driving up to his neighborhood because there were a lot of nice houses, and around the Halloween season they're really fun to look at. I dropped him off first and started to drive to Michael's, which was now probably going to be a 25-minute drive, and it was already around 2:30 a.m. at this point. Morgan was spending the night at his house, so after dropping them off, I had started to drive back to our city. Jade had offered spending the night because I was tired, and I thanked her profusely. We got to my house, and after I changed and washed off as much of the makeup as I could, I just about crashed in my bed. I woke up to Jade in the bathroom that connected to my room. She apologized for waking me up and then laid down next to me. After a couple of seconds, she then got up and asked if I heard that. I listened and heard footsteps right above my window well. My room is in the basement of my house, so the footsteps would be in our backyard in the west alleyway between our house and our gate and fence. "It's probably just raccoons," I said. "No, they sound too heavy to be a raccoon," Jade then said. "It's probably just bear," I said, referring to my 100-pound Malamute. "No, we locked his doggy door, remember?" she asked. "He has a special doggy door that only opens when it senses this fob that we keep on our dog's collar. This keeps the raccoons out. It also had an option to completely lock, so even with the fob, the door won't open. I didn't remember locking it, but I also didn't have an answer, so I just stayed silent. She then got up. "Where are you going?" I asked, and she then replied that she was going to check if it really was bear. I would really feel bad if I had let her go check it out alone. On my way up the stairs to the first floor, I saw my dog sleeping in front of the basement door, so it couldn't have been him. But now I was curious, so I go to our backyard door and opened it and then stepped out onto the porch. I looked around and couldn't really see much from on the porch with the porch light, so I stepped down and started investigating with my phone flashlight. I could see the glow of my LED lights through my window and didn't really see anything else. That's when an animatronic in my west side neighbor's backyard went off, scaring me. It was some sort of crypt keeper thing that has green glowing eyes and talks. My neighbors love Halloween, so they have decorations in their front and backyard. I jumped and this caused me to speedily walk back inside. Jade had asked me if I saw anything, and I just said no because I really didn't. We got back into my bed and I fell asleep. I woke up again in the middle of the night to the sounds of the animatronic going off yet again. I just assumed it was a motion sensor or something, and it was picking up a stray cat or raccoons, then went back to sleep. I woke up again in the middle of the night because of my LED lights. I like having them on while I try to sleep, but after I sleep they really bother me, and mine doesn't have a timer. I heard the animatronic again, but this time when I turned off the lights, I was surprised to see my window well glowing green. We have barred covers over them so that nothing can get down in them, but the well was glowing green and it sounded like the animatronic was right above my well. I was now freaked out. I don't know how Jade stayed asleep, but I laid there scared to move or anything. Eventually it stopped. I just sat there for a while awake trying to calm down. I thought that it had to be someone messing with me, so after scrolling through my phone a bit to get tired again, I fell back to sleep. I woke up the next morning and saw my LED lights were still off, so I definitely wasn't dreaming about it last night. While Jade was getting ready, I called Michael to see if he was messing with me. He didn't answer. He was probably still asleep from being hammered last night. I then realized, why would Michael drive all the way over to my house drunk just to mess with me? I know his girlfriend wouldn't drive him either because she's more of a homebody type. Then it hit me. Our neighbors have a son who's my age. In fact, he played on the football team as well, and I knew him very well. I called him and I was actually surprised when he answered. I started telling him about the animatronic scaring me while I was outside, but I didn't mention the part to him about it being above my well. I wanted him to think that I just slept through it and that he went through all that work just for me to sleep through it like a baby. Well, he then told me that all of the animatronics should be unplugged because he and his family are out of town for the weekend and that they wanted to prevent an electrical fire or anything of that nature. I've known him for a while and I know that he can't lie very well, so this really caught me off guard. I also realized that I didn't see him at the party, so he really was probably out of town. I asked if I could go over and just make sure that they were unplugged. I texted Michael to call me when he was awake. Jade was finished and she said she would come along because she wanted to hang out with Jake's girlfriend. I explained how we have to go over nearby to check on all the animatronics, and she came with me. I went straight to the skeleton one to see if it was plugged in. It was unplugged. I followed the wire up and down at least 3 times just to make sure I was holding the right unplugged wire. I was. When we got there, the mess was already picked up besides a few cups. I went down to the basement to get another box of garbage bags with Jake, and I then saw a Jason mask on the floor. I picked it up and it was Bob's. The events of last night hit me. The footsteps, the skeleton. I wondered if it was Bob in my backyard. I thought there was no way. He doesn't even know where I live. He also isn't very coordinated, so seeing him carry an animatronic is just something that I couldn't even imagine. We did find it weird though how we would find his mask in the basement of the house, the one part that was off limits. Michael called me later in the day. I explained everything to him, and he was adamant that it wasn't him. I still don't know if those footsteps were connected with the animatronic, and I still don't know if Bob was even connected to those events. After that though, he had started acting even more strange. Either that or my mind really was open to how odd he was. Either way, as Halloween comes up, those neighbors have continued to put the Crypt Keeper in their front yard, and I still wonder to this day what happened on that chilly October night. The year of 2003 was a tough one for my family and I. My mother and father had just gone through a divorce, and my father was working late one Halloween night. I was 14 and my sister was 7, so my dad trusted me to take my little sister Emily trick-or-treating. When Emily and I had gotten back from school, I had noticed a piece of paper on my mailbox. It was just a piece of paper that said, "I would die for you." As you can imagine, this gave me the chills, so I brought it in to show my dad, but he wasn't home. He must have left the house early for work. so I decided to just throw it away and not let Emily know about it. That night, our plan was to go out and hit every house and get more candy than ever. We went out and we had a very fun time, and I even ran into some friends. We were on our walk back home when we had heard a voice coming from someone's house. "Hey kids, hey, come over here," a man said. We looked around and we didn't see anyone until Emily grabbed me and then screamed and pointed at the window. There was a man dressed like a clown. "Come in. I have Play-Doh and I have any candy here you can imagine." We then ran as fast as we could down the road screaming until we finally made it home. Once I got home, I realized that our front door wasn't just unlocked, but wide open. I remember saying hello a few times until I figured that maybe the wind just blew our door open. We sat in the living room and tried to just forget all about our encounter with the strange clown in the window. We were counting our Halloween candy and watching Hocus Pocus until we had heard someone knock at the door. We knew that it couldn't be our dad and knew for a fact that it wasn't our mom. "Who's there?" I said. There was a long pause until the person responded. "I'm Jesus Christ. I'm here to save you from the evil of Halloween." Emily screamed and we then ran into our dad's room with the door locked. I tried calling our dad a few times, but he wouldn't answer. Then we saw a figure near the window of my dad's room. It was a person standing there in a suit with a pig's mask. "It's okay. I'm Jesus, and I died for the sins of the children," he said. We then hid behind our father's bed and were scared shitless. We could hear him tapping the window and humming some strange song. "Let me in or I'll slit my wrist tonight when I watch you sleep," he said. We both just laid on the floor shaking in fear. Emily had started to cry, and I had to stay strong for her. After a while, the man had left, but my sister and I still stayed in the same spot behind our dad's bed for over an hour until my dad got home. We told him what happened, and he didn't even really care or listen much. He just wanted to rest after a long day of work. The very next day, we had had a disc on our front porch. It was a blank DVD disc that had "Do not watch unless you love Jesus" written all over it with Sharpie. I went into my room and started watching it on my PlayStation 2. It was some of the scariest and disturbing imagery I had ever seen. It was just very disturbing images of a very, very tall man walking in the woods on stilts in a suit. The video would cut with a VHS static effect to a silhouette of a man in a field on a cross. It would just keep cutting to random disturbing images. One other image I remember was in black and white of an extremely overweight man in bed with a ton of white face paint eating out of a tub of ice cream with his bare hands. The video had no other sound than a slight static sound in the background. I gave the DVD to my dad and told him what had happened, and he said he would take a look. That was the last I'd ever seen of that DVD, and my dad never mentioned anything of it again. He told me that he just threw it away and didn't really get a chance to watch it. I guess if my dad didn't care, then neither should I. I wonder who that could have been and why they wanted to scare a child so damn badly. Were they really dangerous, or were they just playing some really sick prank? I guess I'll never know. The year of 2014 was one of my favorite times in my life. I had just graduated high school, got my first job, and was ready for life to really begin. My high school buddies and I were still very close since we all lived in the same area. We kept our weekend shenanigans for as long as we could, until sometime in our early 20s when we all parted ways. Some of those memories we made really have a special place in my heart, but there's one incident that will rest in my memory in the most unsettling way. It was early October of 2014, and my friends and I were really excited for all of the fun we would get into during the Halloween season. There were tons of parties, haunted houses, as well as bonfires throughout the season. One night, me and two friends and their girlfriends were looking for something spooky to get into. It was myself, my buddy James, his girlfriend Morgan, and Trevor and his girlfriend Allison. I was the single guy of the group, and it never really bothered me to be the fifth wheel when hanging out with them. Trevor mentioned this old cemetery in our town that we were all familiar with. The cemetery was really creepy since there was an Indian burial ground smack in the middle of it. Our plan was to use one of those stupid ghost hunting apps, drink beer, smoke some pot, and just hang out and maybe see if something creepy would happen if we were lucky. When we arrived, there were no lights in the cemetery, and it was very dark. The cemetery was closed and gated, so we had to jump a fence to get in. I led the way with my iPhone flashlight since the other two guys were comforting their scared girlfriends. We were having a good time until Allison swore that she saw someone. We all thought she was full of it, but she swore there was a person in the woods. This really creeped me out, but I didn't let it bother me. I was young and overly confident in my ability to kick someone's ass if placed in a bad situation, so I played the tough guy. Don't worry, Allison. If there's someone actually out there, trust me, they don't want to mess with us, and I'll make damn sure of it, I said with a smirk. After a few minutes of ghost hunting, we all then heard a cough come from the top of the burial ground. It was hard to see up there since it was dark, and a big tree stood right on top of it. I wanted to be the hard ass of the group, so I had started walking close to it. "Hello?" I said as I started to walk up the hill. I heard and saw nothing, so I started to turn around. Then as I was heading back to my group of friends, we all heard the sound of an acoustic guitar playing. We all froze in silence and listened. We started to follow the music and we could hear the man singing a song about a skeleton. The lyrics were something like, "Poor skeleton, I've waited for you. Poor skeleton, I'll take you home." The girls were far behind as they refused to go anywhere near the music. Trevor stood back with them as James and I went to go see who would be playing music in a cemetery this late at night. We hid behind a tree as we watched a skinny middle-aged man with a fedora play a song. He was alone, and it seemed like he thought he was the only one in the cemetery. He then stopped playing and then just stared at the tree where we were hiding. I decided not to startle the guy, so I stepped from behind the tree. "Hey man, I heard your music and I wanted to get a listen. Sounds good," I said as he just continued to stare at us. "We were just ghost hunting and having some beer. We hope you don't mind," I said to him. The man just sat there still as a statue and just stared at us. I still get chills whenever I think of him just sitting there in the pure darkness right next to a grave. You couldn't see his face since the fedora mostly covered it. We began walking back to the girls and Trevor when we then heard the man then say, "Yeah, sure." James and I just stood there. When we turned around, he was in the same spot but standing. "What was that?" James said. The man started running towards us, and in an instant reaction, we ran off. The rest of our friends saw us running and thought we were just messing around. "Let's go, we have to go," I said. "He's coming after us." Trevor and the girls just laughed and made jokes. They thought we were kidding until they then saw him appear from the darkness. "This is my cemetery," the man said. "You think you belong here? You think you can laugh and make fun of me?" We stood there frozen in fear. "You better stay the hell away from us, man," I told him. He then ran straight towards us as I held my fist up ready to hit him. He came really close to us, then jetted to the right straight into the woods. He just kept going until we couldn't see him. The five of us ran to the fence and then left. The next day, I asked my mom if she knew of anyone who owned that cemetery, and she said that the owners are usually there during the week just cutting the grass, and I should report what happened to them. Trevor and I went by a few days later and got to speak with the groundskeeper. We told him what happened, and he told us that we shouldn't be going to the old cemetery after hours. He lectured us for a short while, then addressed the concern that we had about the man. He told us they've caught all kinds of strange activity going on there at night. He said the most common are Satanists that come from the city at night and try performing odd rituals at the cemetery. He told us that he suspects the man to be a local who lives with his parents. He described the guy as an oddball who likes to walk around the cemetery during the day with no business being there. His description of the man was also pretty spot on from what I could remember seeing. I still to this day have not found out who that man might have been, but knowing now what I already know, I will never return to that cemetery at night.
I've lived alone for most of my adult life, not by some great design or a tragedy, just by default. No kids, no ex-wife, not even a dog. I had a job that I didn't hate, enough friends to keep me from going completely nuts, and a few hobbies that would pass the time. The rest was just filler. If something needed done, I would do it eventually. Laundry, dishes, groceries, car maintenance. All of it existed on this weird clock of motivation that rarely lined up with logic. I kept the fridge mostly empty because I hated grocery stores. I hated cooking even more. Most nights I'd realize that I was hungry, hop in the car for a drive-thru or a pickup order. I knew every greasy spoon and every takeout window within a 10-mile radius. The place that I lived in was this squat little rental, just off a frontage road behind a rundown strip mall. One bedroom, no yard to speak of, blinds that were always crooked. It was quiet enough, which is all I really cared about. Never had any trouble with the neighbors. Never had any real sense of community either. Most nights I'd get home late, kick off my boots, fire up Hulu or PlayStation, and ride the couch into the early hours. Sometimes I'd scroll through dating apps or online auctions just to kill some time. I didn't drink much, never saw the appeal, and I never touched drugs. I was just lazy in a way that felt like it ran in my blood. The only thing I really stayed on top of was work. I wasn't passionate about it or anything, but it kept the lights on, paid my rent. I was the kind of guy who just did it enough to keep moving forward, even if that meant barely. The house was cluttered but not filthy. The car had its issues but still ran. I didn't owe anybody anything and nobody owed me. It was a very simple, low-stakes existence, and I'd gotten real comfortable living in that way. Until one of these nights, it came off the rails because I couldn't be bothered to cook dinner. That night, I got off work around 9. I was wiped. I hadn't eaten anything since noon, and the idea of boiling water or even making a sandwich felt like a whole ordeal. So I grabbed my keys, called in an order to this hole-in-the-wall Chinese place that I like, Paco Panda, out by the gas station. I picked something to stream while I waited. Some murder show probably. I just remember my stomach twisting up at the thought of sesame chicken. It was only a short drive, maybe 10 minutes. The place was mostly empty when I walked in. I paid, grabbed my bag, and thanked the lady at the counter, and went back to my car. The food smelled amazing. I remember turning the heater on full blast even though it was early fall. My idea of a food hack. I just wanted to get home, plant my ass on the couch, and eat straight from the cartons. I hit the first light coming out of the parking lot and came to a stop. Music was playing, Let's Go to War by the Murder Dolls, and everything was normal until I noticed movement off to my left. There was this old sun-bleached sedan pulling up beside me, engine rattling, windows down. I glanced over and saw 4 guys inside, early 20s maybe. At first I thought they were trying to get my attention about something, maybe my lights were off or I dropped my wallet or something. I turned my music down and rolled my window halfway. "What?" I called out to them. The guy in the passenger seat leaned out and yelled at me. "You look like you beat off to cartoons, bro." There was this beat where I really didn't react, and then it kind of clicked. They were just being dickheads. I don't know why, but I fired back something without thinking. "Is that something you know a lot about? You like cartoon cum time?" His face dropped, just for a second, but it was enough. Then the light turned green and I gunned it. I didn't expect them to follow me, but they did. They didn't tailgate me or try to run me off the road or anything crazy at first. They just stayed behind me, nice and steady. I took a few more turns trying to be sure they were. They matched every move. I pulled into this random grocery store lot and looped around to see if they break off, but they didn't. By the time I made it back to my neighborhood, my hands were sweating on the wheel. I considered circling the block maybe, trying to lose them, but I figured screw it. They'll get bored eventually, right? I pulled into my driveway and left the engine running. Their car rolled up right behind me and stopped in the street. 3 of them got out. The driver stayed put. I didn't recognize any of them. One was tall and wiry, wearing this ski cap even though it wasn't cold out. Another had a hoodie with the strings tied around his face now. The third looked like he had prison muscle, just thick and mean. They didn't charge at my car or anything, they just spread out, slowly walking around me, looking in the windows and muttering something to each other. I stayed in the driver's seat, clutching the steering wheel like a lifeline. My phone was in my pocket, but I hadn't reached for it. I didn't want to draw any attention. "All right, come on out, tough guy," one of them said. "Yeah, keep talking that shit," said another, tapping on the glass with his knuckle. I still didn't move. One of them kicked the driver's side door, hard enough to rattle me, and dented it, of course. Then they all laughed. They stood in my yard for maybe 5 more minutes, pointing at stuff, my trash cans, the porch light, my car, just taking stock of what they could fuck with. I expected them to key my doors, to slash a tire, or maybe worse, but eventually they got back in their car and took off without another word. I sat there for another 5 minutes before moving, just breathing, trying to calm down. Then I grabbed my food, went inside, and double locked the door. It took me a while to eat. My hands were still shaking, but after a few bites and a few episodes of whatever was on Hulu, things started to settle. I actually started to feel a little stupid about it. Probably just bored kids looking for a thrill. Nothing too serious. By 10, I'd moved on to playing some kind of shooter online. The tension was gone. I was in my boxers, half a beer left on the coffee table, game controller in my hand, completely relaxed. That was at least until past midnight, and that's when I heard footsteps outside my house. Not distant ones, not from the sidewalk or the road. These were closer, on my driveway, slow, heavy crunches. I muted the TV and went to the front window, moving the curtain just enough to peek through. There it was, same shitty sedan, parked in the same exact spot, 3 figures moving up the path to my front door. And this time, they weren't joking around. Same guys, same car, same dead-eyed swagger, like they owned the night itself. One of them had something in his hand, I couldn't really tell what. Maybe a tire iron or a flashlight, but it caught the porch light weird and had this glint and shadow to it. I backed away from the window and locked the deadbolt, then the knob, then slid on the security chain across. My heart was thudding so loud it sounded like footsteps in my ears too. I didn't have a gun, never thought I needed one. I didn't even have mace. Just the kitchen full of dull knives and a vague sense of regret. One of the guys banged on the door, flat palm first and then with his fist. He barked at me to open up. "Come on, you tough shit. Come say what you said earlier." They pounded harder. The door was old, hollow core, rental grade garbage. It wouldn't last too long if they really wanted in. For a second I couldn't move. I just stood there in the living room in my socks, lights still on, beer going warm. My mouth was dry as chalk. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I say? 3 guys are outside being scary? I hung out with these rough kids growing up, and I knew how that would go. They'd be gone before a cruiser even showed up, if one even showed up. I turned off the lights. In the dark, the panic sharpened. It made everything feel thinner and more fragile. I could hear them talking out there, louder now. One of them was trying the doorknob. Another stomped on the steps like a child throwing a fit. Then it went quiet. I crept inside the back bedroom. My closet door was open, and inside was something I haven't touched in years, this cheap-ass katana that I bought at the state fair back in high school. It wasn't sharpened, just some steel replica meant to sit on a stand. But it was heavy, long, and intimidating enough in the right lighting. I grabbed it, then opened up a plastic bin where I kept this old Halloween junk, pulled out the mask that I wore a few years ago, this rubber demon face with warped horns and sharp teeth. It stank of dust and plastic, but I shoved it on and made for the back door. I slipped outside, moving along the side of the house, keeping low. The grass under my feet was wet. My heart was still slamming in my chest. I inched forward until I could see the 3 of them again, still near the porch, looking pissed and confused. 30 more seconds, dumbass, one of them called out. Then we break your fucking windows. I didn't give myself any time to think or think twice. I charged. I came around the side of the house full speed, barefoot and wild, swinging the katana over my head like a lunatic. I didn't yell anything coherent, just a howl and this high and raw that ripped out of my chest. They all turned at once. I don't know what they thought they saw, a masked freak with a sword, barefoot and snarling, but it was enough. One of them screamed. The big one tripped over his own feet trying to run backwards, and they all scrambled back to their car, door slamming, tires screeching as they peeled off into the dark. I stood there in the yard until the engine noise faded, and that was the last time I ever saw them. After that, I started locking the doors earlier, got a motion light installed, even went and bought a real baseball bat, not for show. I still eat that Chinese takeout, I still live alone, still waste far too much time on the couch, but I don't really mouth off to strangers anymore. When I was younger and still living in the city, I moved apartments like other people would change clothes. It wasn't that I was getting evicted or anything, they were just these super cheap places, Always a few in classifieds or easy to bounce between if your lease was up or if you didn't like the neighborhood anymore. I didn't own too much either. Bed, couch, TV, some clothes. So packing up and leaving wasn't really that big of a deal. That lifestyle kind of fit me. Everything about it made sense at the time. I liked being close to the action. I liked that I could walk to a bar, hit a movie, grab food, all without needing to plan really anything. The last place that I lived before it all went bad was on the east side, right off this long boulevard that cut through a bunch of old brick duplexes. My apartment was a little bigger than the one before it. The floors were warped, the heater ticked all night like it was full of rocks, but it was mine. I moved in just as summer was ending. I remember dragging my mattress up the stairs and being drenched in sweat by the time I got to the top. There was this weird smell in the hallway too, kind of like old carpet with rotting fruit, but I figured I'll get used to it. You always do. The unit across from mine had its blinds drawn and a door scuffed to hell. I didn't think too much of it, just another tenant, right? The guy who lived there looked like he worked construction or maybe bounced at one of the bars. Shaved head, wide shoulders, sunburnt neck. He had a woman too, but I didn't really see much of her in the beginning. I just heard her. Well, I heard both of them. The fights escalated slowly, then all at once. First, it was raised voices, then crashes and thuds. I'd lie awake on my couch with the volume turned up just to drown it all out, but it always cut through. Him yelling like a man possessed, her begging like she was already half defeated. Sometimes I'd hear her out in the hallway, crying, late at night when I got back from the bar. Just her voice echoing off that brick night after night. The cops came twice. I called both times. They never stayed more than 10 minutes. One time I watched the peephole, saw the guy standing shirtless in the doorway, arms crossed, just nodding while one of the officers asked him a few questions. The second time they didn't even get past the front door. It was like they had this routine: get in, calm things down, leave before the paperwork would start to pile up. I actually started sleeping with earplugs, but they didn't help. You can't drown out somebody being hit, and you can't unhear that slap, that wet, awful sound, or the silence that always followed it. Then came the night that I remember being the worst. It had been quiet for 2 days straight, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she finally left him. I got home around 7, made some pasta, and sat down to eat in front of the TV. Around 8:30, it started up again, a scream that cut through everything. And it wasn't just fear, it was panic, full body panic. I muted the TV, already standing up. He was yelling and stomping around. Then I heard something shatter. I heard her say, "Don't, please, don't do that again." And it sounded like somebody getting slammed into the wall. My wall. Didn't really think, I just acted. Grabbed my phone and called the police, again. I told them it's serious, that he actually might kill her this time. Somebody needed to come right now. They gave me the same answer as before. If nobody from that apartment called, their hands were tied unless I heard a weapon, whatever that meant. So I hung up and crossed the hall. No plan, just heat in my chest and a sick churn in my stomach. I knocked, no answer, just the muffled chaos inside. I pounded harder and the whole door rattled. This time it was ripped open and there he was. He looked taller in the doorway. He filled it even, shoulders so wide they cast a shadow far over me. His chest was bare, his stomach was heaving, and his face was soaked in sweat and wild-eyed with rage. His mouth was tight like he was chewing on broken glass. "What the fuck do you want?" he asked me. "Look, she's screaming, man," I said. "I already called the cops. Enough is enough." He stared at me, no blink, no twitch, and I realized just how close I was to him, only a few inches. I could smell the beer on his breath, the sweat soaking into his skin. "I'm not gonna say it again," I told him. "Let her go." And that's when it happened. He didn't say a word to me, didn't shout, just grabbed the front of my shirt and yanked me so far forward that my feet left the ground. I slammed into the hallway wall. Pain exploded in my ribs. I tried to push him back to get some space, but the fist came down and caught me clean across the jaw. I saw white and dropped. He kept coming though. I scrambled and crawled backwards down the hallway toward my own door. He landed a boot in my stomach, and I coughed so hard that I thought my lungs were about to come up. He didn't stop either. Another punch caught me in the cheek. I hit the floor hard and rolled toward my door, everything spinning. Behind him, I just saw her, just a flash, standing in the doorway holding the frame. blood running from her nose. She screamed at me to run. Her voice was hollow though, like somebody that's already halfway gone. I got my key in the lock barely, yanked open the door, and staggered inside. He followed me, still swinging. I threw my weight against the door and managed to get it shut just long enough to drop the chain lock. He pounded on the other side, still yelling at me through the door. I slid down to the floor panting, spilling blood onto my tile. I thought it was over then, but he didn't go away. I sat there with my back up against the door, shaking uncontrollably. My left eye was swole shut, and I couldn't take a full breath without pain ripping through my ribs. My hands were sticky with blood, some his, mostly mine. Through the door, I could still hear him out there, pacing, breathing, whispering things that I couldn't quite make out. The door then jolted hard and I jumped up. Another slam, then a pause, then the wood cracking. I scrambled backward, trying to drag the coffee table across the entryway, but my arms wouldn't move right. I think it was dislocated. The chain lock snapped and the door buckled and groaned. Then it gave out completely. He stood there in the frame, calm now, breathing slowly. "Should have just minded your own fucking business," he said. I tried to stand and didn't make it. He crossed my room in 2 steps, grabbed me by the collar, and flung me toward the hallway. I hit the wall, shoulder first, and dropped. I tried to crawl, but he kicked the back of my head and I folded. Then came more punches, hard, deep ones to the ribs and back, like he was trying to reach through me. I think I blacked out for a second because when I opened up my eyes, I was in my bedroom. He dragged me there. I was on the mattress on my back, the bed lopsided from the force that he'd thrown me in with. My blood was already soaking into the sheets. He stood over me panting, then reached down, and this is the part that still sticks with me the most. Pulled the blanket up over me, tucked it around my sides like a mother putting her kid to sleep. "Don't knock on my fucking door again," he said. "You don't call anyone, you don't even look at me or her." He turned around and started walking, then stopped in the doorway. "Oh, I'm taking this too," he added. I couldn't see it clearly, but I heard the clink, the hook near the front door, the spare key that I always left hanging there. He took it. "If I hear you say a word to anybody," he said, "I'll come in while you're sleeping, and I'll slit your fucking throat." And then just like that, he was gone. The door creaked closed behind him. I heard his boots retreat across the hallway, the quiet pull of his apartment door opening and then shutting. No lock, no final word, just that silence again. I laid in bed until morning and didn't sleep at all, didn't move, just stared at the ceiling and listened to the pipes moan behind the wall. Every little creak sounded like another footstep. Every car door outside made my stomach twist. I kept thinking he was coming back, that he'd left something unfinished. I didn't go to work the next day or the next day after that. I didn't call the cops because, again, what would I say? That I got beat up for playing hero? That I poked my nose where it didn't belong? It probably wouldn't even come out again. So a week later, I started looking for new places. It took me 2 full months, but I finally got out. Didn't even break the lease, just paid through the end and walked. I left half my furniture behind. I couldn't stand to look at the bed again. The mattress was still bloody. I didn't even have it in me to throw it out. Just let the landlord deal with it. Now I triple check my locks. I keep my blinds shut. I flinch when somebody knocks on the wall, even if it's just the pipes. I still don't even sleep right to this day. I'll wake up thinking he's back, standing at the foot of my bed, holding up that key. I never saw that woman again either. Sometimes or occasionally I'll think back to her, wonder if she ever got out, or if she's still in there, taking those punches and screaming behind those old, paper-thin walls. It was the spring of 1996. I was a 15-year-old American girl living in Pakistan with my grandparents. My family had been going through some difficult times back home in the US, and my mother, wanting to shield me from the turmoil, decided it would be best for me to live abroad for a while. What started as this temporary arrangement turned into something a lot more permanent by choice. I'd been in Pakistan since the age of 11, and over time, it truly began to feel like home. I embraced the culture, learned the language, and built strong relationships with my family and friends. Despite having the option to return to the US after every visit, I always chose to stay. Pakistan just became my second home. Our household was always full. My grandparents, my aunt and uncle, their 3 children, the neighbors, and of course, frequent visitors. We had this open door policy, both literally and figuratively. It was the kind of neighborhood where people rarely locked their doors during the day. It felt safe, secure, or at least so we thought. Inside households like ours, it's common to hire domestic help, cooks, cleaners, and general helpers. While my family opted for female help, especially when daughters were in the house, some would prefer young male workers who were seen as stronger and more agile. My grandparents hired this male helper, Bashir, who had his own quarters outside the house. Despite his presence being normalized in our culture, I always felt this deep unease around him. Maybe it was instinctual or maybe just caution, but I got into this habit of locking any room that I was in when I was home, alone or not, just in case. Being in Pakistan is different. My grandparents were wealthy, but knew danger could lie around any corner, especially for a young girl like myself. And on one particular day in spring, everything changed. That afternoon, I was relaxing in my aunt and uncle's bedroom watching TV. It was my favorite spot when they weren't home because they had this private television, unlike the shared one inside the family lounge downstairs. Now, I had no idea at the time, but I was alone in the house for the first time since moving to Pakistan. My grandfather was at work, my aunt and uncle had taken the kids to another town, and my grandmother had just left for an errand with our driver. Then came a knock, loud, repetitive, and urgent. I paused the TV and placed my ear against the door. It was Bashir. He was calling my name in a hurried, anxious tone, asking me to open up. When I asked what he needed, he claimed he had something to give to me. I refused, and he quickly shifted, saying he needed to ask me something. So I told him to ask me through the door. But he didn't respond with words. Instead, he began turning the knob and pushing it against the door frame a lot more forcefully. My heart started pounding and reality sank in. I was alone with him. Panic set in, but so did instinct. I looked around for options. The phone in the bedroom was useless without the phone directory, which was downstairs near my grandparents' room. I didn't have any phone numbers memorized. I looked out the front window, hoping to spot somebody nearby, maybe the neighbor or the friend who lived across the street, but no such luck. Meanwhile, Bashir was still trying to get in. I thought about hiding in the closet, but it had no lock. I made a quick decision and ran to the attached bathroom. It had 2 locks. I secured both and climbed up to the small window high up on the wall, hoping to get somebody's attention. Once up there, I could see the neighboring house very clearly and tried yelling to get the helpers outside, but just as I was about to scream louder, I heard a familiar voice. It was my grandmother. She was calling my name from the hallway. I waited for confirmation though, and when I finally heard her voice again, I carefully opened up the bathroom door and then the bedroom door to find my grandmother standing alone and breathless. She immediately apologized, saying she just realized that I was home alone by myself and had now rushed back. She and I both knew what a dangerous mistake it had been to leave me alone that day. I never ended up telling her what Bashir had done. I don't know if she saw him retreat from the door or noticed something was off, but I kept it to myself. The whole ordeal lasted no more than 20 minutes, but it was the most terrifying 20 minutes of my life. Feeling trapped, helpless, and vulnerable inside your own home was this brutal awakening. Years later in the mid-2000s, I returned to Pakistan for a visit with my mom. By then, I was back in the US full-time. One afternoon while visiting my grandparents, my mom and aunts started to tease me about this quote-unquote surprise visitor who had come all the way from another village just to see me. They were laughing and nudging each other as they told me to come into the living room. I walked in and there he was, Bashir. My heart sank. He looked unwell. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had that dazed look of somebody who hadn't slept in days. He stared at me with this strange intensity. I kept my face calm and greeted him politely and said I'd heard he got married. Congratulations. He nodded silently. I quickly excused myself and went to my room. That was the last time I saw him. Even after all those years, seeing him brought everything flooding back to me. The fear, the panic, the knowledge that something horrible could indeed have happened that day. Now, I'll never know what his true intentions were, but my gut tells me that I narrowly escaped something awful. What he didn't know was that I wasn't some naive, easily fooled girl. I was a fighter. I'd grown up with 2 older brothers and had been learning karate since I was 6. My instructor actually used to call me Little Tiger, and if he would have managed to break through those doors, he would have met the tiger inside me. That day shaped me. It taught me about instincts, strength, and survival, and I've carried all that silently with me for years, but today, I finally speak it out loud. Thanks for listening.
I'm sharing this story anonymously for reasons that will become obvious later on. And before we get into this, I just want to preface this experience and warn everyone listening. This is probably going to be one of the most fucked up stories you've heard in a while. I was inspired to share this when I saw how poorly the release of the Epstein files was handled. Not to suggest that my story has anything to do with that, but to let young folks know that these sadistic, hellbound demons have been doing this sort of bullshit for a very long time, and they always pay off the right people to get away with it. And then guys like me are labeled conspiracy theorists, but the truth is that it's more convenient for people to buy into the lies. Anyway, this happened during the summer of 1987, on a sunny afternoon in the Sunshine State. I worked for the Coast Guard back in those days, but on that day, I was off duty, after working a string of 12-hour shifts pulling weakened boaters out of trouble. I was doing some fishing in my little Ranger boat. I had my cooler of beer, my fishing rod, and was listening to a baseball game over the radio. I eventually motored out past the markers into open water, then cut the engine off a few miles offshore, allowing the current to do the work. I wasn't getting any bites, but I was too angry at the Mets to care. There was no one out on the water that day. I fished around this area a few times before, but never in this particular section. I was pretty sure I was off the coast of some private property, but there was no signage to indicate so. So I carried on. I would say it was around 4, maybe 4:30, when I spotted something in the water, maybe 3/4 of a mile west. At first, I thought it was a freighter, or maybe a cruise ship, but as I drifted closer, I saw that it was a yacht, the kind you see tied up at the fancy marinas in Fort Lauderdale. The ones that make you wonder who on earth could afford them, except this one wasn't moving at all. And there was no anchor chain. It looked like it was just drifting. I throttled up to it, curious. Yachts this size just don't go adrift without someone noticing. Maybe there was engine trouble, or maybe there was a medical emergency. I grabbed my bullhorn. "Hello, is anyone there? Do you need assistance?" No one responded. I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. I could see a name on the stern now. Serafina, in gold script. The deck looked deserted. I had an inkling that this could be an illegal drug transport vessel. We dealt with those a lot back in those days. But I figured even the drug cartels wouldn't want a yacht of this size drifting off the coast to be spotted by some asshole in a fishing boat. It was more likely that something happened on board, and the boat was either abandoned, or someone was below deck, incapacitated. I should have turned around, but I had spent enough years in the Guard pulling people out of bad situations to know that silence on the water usually means trouble. I eased my boat alongside and tied up to the platform, then climbed aboard onto the yacht's main deck. "Hello? Anyone aboard?" No answer. The yacht looked pristine, cushions tight, no cups or towels scattered around, no sign of recent use. The salon doors were open, so I stepped inside, keeping one hand on the knife on my belt. "Hello? Is anyone here?" I called again. Still nothing. The interior looked how you would expect it to. Cream leather, polished wood. Whoever owned this boat had some serious money. I then noticed a half-finished drink sitting on the bar. The ice was almost gone, and a pool of water was below it. Remembering this still gives me the chills, because it was the first indication that I wasn't alone. I moved toward a stairwell that led to the lower cabins. That's when I heard it. A low, wet sound. Not mechanical. It was like someone chewing something. My stomach dropped. I drew my knife. I had a .38 back on the Ranger, but I was too caught up in the moment to go back to get it. The sound grew louder as I eased down the steps. The lower corridor was dim. The doors to the guest cabins were all closed, except for one at the far end, where the sound was coming from. I rounded the doorway and froze. I could not believe what I saw. There was an older man, maybe late 60s, completely naked. He appeared to be wearing a pair of headphones that were connected to a record player behind him. He was kneeling on the carpet. In front of him was a boy. Couldn't have been older than 10. Most of his face was gone. The old man was eating him, making that wet sound. I like to think the boy was already dead, but I swear I could see his lower jaw moving, with his eyes wide open. The man's head then snapped up. His mouth was red, with strings of tissue hanging from his chin. Eyes wide, pupils blown. I recognized that look. He was on something. "Who the hell are you?" he snarled. I turned and ran. I still kick myself mentally for not burying that knife into that man's head. I ran across the salon, back out onto the deck. My heart was pounding as I vaulted for the rail. I yanked the Ranger's line free and shoved off hard. I then rammed the throttle forward. I was maybe 100 yards out when the first crack came. Sharp, flat, louder than the motor. I ducked instinctively, then glanced back. I could see someone on the yacht's deck, aiming a rifle. Another shot rang out. But fortunately, he missed again. I kept the throttle pinned, not looking back until the yacht was just a white speck against the horizon. My hand shook so bad, I could barely hold course. Back at the dock, I called it in on a payphone outside the marina office. First, local PD. Then, my watchmaster at the station. I told them everything, and they took it serious. 30 minutes later, I saw choppers combing the area. I gave my statement, giving every detail I could. I wanted this man to be found and arrested. I also felt overwhelming regret for not taking matters into my own hands. This is something that still haunts me to this day. I came face to face with pure evil, and I fled like a coward. Back then, I was naively patriotic and believed that the law holds people accountable, even if they have deep pockets. I know better now. A day later, I got the call. Not from the local PD, but from my own Master Chief. He told me to report to the office ASAP. I drove to the station with a knotted stomach. I could tell this was serious. Whatever he wanted to tell me, he wanted to do so in person. When I got there, he slid a single piece of paper across his desk. It was a typed memo. There was a classified stamp crossed out, but still visible. "The incident you reported has been handled." Handled how? Handled. The vessel was recovered. There were no bodies and no evidence of foul play. Official finding, mechanical failure. Accidental grounding later that night. Case closed. "But, sir, there was a kid, and the guy was..." "I know what you reported, and I'm telling you, that didn't happen." "That's bullshit, sir." He got up and closed his office door. "You're going to take some time off, and you're going to forget all about this. You mention this to the press, to anyone, and your time in the service ends tomorrow. Understand?" Orders came down directly from the top this morning. I suggest you forget all about this and be grateful that you're not being arrested for trespassing. You were fishing in private waters." I was in shock, completely dumbfounded. The chief then took a seat directly next to me and spoke in a low voice. "Look, I like you, so I'm going to give it to you straight. They're going to make life hell for you and your family. For your sake and for theirs. Forget about this." I drove home that day, feeling numb. I sat in the driveway for a long time with the engine running. I can still hear it sometimes, that awful wet, chewing sound. The man's eyes looking up at me, not afraid, just annoyed that someone had interrupted him. I don't know who he was, but I do know this. He wasn't some drifter or junkie who stumbled onto a boat. He had money, connections, people who could make a crime scene vanish and threaten a Coast Guard man's career to keep quiet. I think about the kind of people who can do that, the kind who drift through the world, untouchable, indulging in things the rest of us couldn't even imagine, the kind that get protected when the rest of us will be locked away forever. I kept my mouth shut for almost 40 years, and I don't do much fishing these days. But when I do see a big white yacht in the water, I flip it off. When I went home for 3 weeks about a month and a half ago, my dad and I decided we should do a bit of night fishing. I'm not a huge fan of night fishing, or any sort of fishing, or my dad for that matter. Our personalities are way too similar, and if you leave us together for more than an hour, there may be blood left over by the time he and I are done playing several dozen rounds of fisticuffs between the stubborn arguing and shouting. Anyways, Dad decided to take me to this river up by our new house that they had just finished building. My mom and brother stayed behind while we made our way through the dark woods. Now my family lives in Oregon, and the river was about 1.5 miles from my family's property, over massive fallen trees and stumps that I could easily trip on. Not knowing the lay of the land, my dad merely scoffed at me and reminded me that city living makes you soft. He didn't use those words exactly, just something along those lines, like some stereotypical cowboy from a Western film. I blame the fact that I didn't know this area as well as he did, and things just spiraled downhill from there, and arguing broke out between us, making the peaceful night loud and chaotic. We didn't stop arguing the entire way down to the river, my father critiquing my less than Christian lifestyle, while I criticized his manner of parenting my 20-year-old autistic brother. By the time we got to the river, we finally settled into an awkward, tense silence as we got our gear out. I knew that this fight was far from over as I sat down on a fallen stump, freezing my ass off. I had lived in a warm climate for over a year, and honestly, coming out here was probably his way of punishing me for leaving the Pacific Northwest. We refused to talk to each other as our lights danced across the water. Then my dad suddenly stood up, his light landing on the other side of the river. There, on the other bank, stood a man, looking right at us. He wore a bright orange t-shirt and a pair of scraggly jeans. For the most part, he was pretty average looking, except for the machete that was hanging off his belt. My dad snapped at me to start packing up all of our things, and so I followed his command as my dad started shouting something at the man across the river. Their conversation was mostly lost to the roar of the white-capped river, but I could see the man making agitated sweeps with his hand every time I looked up. Their voices grew louder, and my fear grew with it. My father has never been one to carry protection in the woods, hence why I was born. This man was armed and possibly dangerous with that machete, and while we had a river between us, it was shallow and had plenty of places to cross. I had no doubts this man could be behind us in mere minutes. Had we wandered onto his property by mistake and just didn't know about it? "Drop the gear and let's go," my dad snarled at me as I took one last look up to see the man starting to walk in the water. My dad then put a firm hand on my shoulder and led me back into the woods toward our house. My dad is an ultra-marathoner. He runs like it's going out of style, and my mostly out-of-shape self probably wouldn't have been able to keep up. I couldn't hear if the man was coming after us. My heart was beating so loud in my ears, but I followed my dad so closely, I almost ran into him several times. Finally, we found our road and made a break back for my parents' house. As soon as we were through the front door, my dad had all the doors locked and was keeping watch out the windows, making sure no crazy men with machetes were creeping up to our house. Finally, when we figured out there were no men wearing orange t-shirts out there, we sat down and began to talk about our experience with my mom. We left at the part where we had been arguing, but told her everything else. We went to bed that night without apologizing. The next day, with the only gun he owned, my father and I walked back out into the woods after calling the police. They said that there was a man who enjoyed scaring people off the forest land, and that we shouldn't be too concerned about it. Feeling a bit sheepish, we went back to the place where we had left our gear, both of us apologizing for our lackluster behavior the night before. When we got back to what we believed to be the spot, we saw our fishing poles had been bent and the lines had been draped from tree to tree. The tackle box was gone. The good news is, me and my dad didn't fight again for the rest of my trip home. This went on for over the course of a year, with the last incident taking place in December of 2016. I used to own this green 1998 Toyota Camry. It was my grandmother's until she gifted it to my parents, who eventually gave it to me as my first car. It was nice and reliable. But I have this bad habit of letting my cars accumulate a bunch of stuff before cleaning them out. Since I still lived with my parents, they would use the car from time to time if they needed. One day, I noticed a bunch of fishing lines with hooks on them in the back of my car. On one of those rare occasions that I actually cleaned it out, a bunch of hooks were embedded into the upholstery, and more are between the creases on the seat. It takes me a while to get them all out, almost pricking myself several times while doing it. I have no idea how long they were there, as the last time I had cleaned my car out was months ago. At any rate, I'm annoyed. At first, I thought my dad had put them in there, as he had recently used this car to transport a bunch of old junk for a garage sale. But when I asked him about it, he told me that he's never seen any fishing hooks or lines in any of the old stuff of ours, and nobody in my family even fishes, so it wouldn't make any sense for us to have it. He's also the only other person that has used my car in the past year or two. I'm the kind of person who locks everything every night. I triple check my car doors, and if I'm even a little uncertain as to whether or not I locked up, I will go back to my car and check, despite any inconvenience. I also park it where I can see it from my bedroom window and hear if anyone is tampering with it, so I doubt anyone could have broken in, and I just assumed Dad missed it and didn't think any more of it. Until a month later, when I found even more fishing hooks in my back seat. At this point, I asked my dad about it again, but he figured that I was either pulling a weird prank on him, or someone is breaking into my car. I wonder why, though, they would break into my car, not steal anything out of it, and leave fishing hooks inside. It just didn't make any sense to me. To give you an idea about how weird this is, I live in a neighborhood where everyone knows everyone, and even have a private Facebook group that started because of a drug house at the end of the street cropping up, though at this point it was no longer there. The group became sort of a neighborhood watch that always posts whenever something suspicious happens around here. So there isn't any neighbors I don't know for miles, and none of the ones I do know would do something this shady. Again, without any explanation or clear motive, it fades into the back of my mind as the days and weeks pass. I eventually get a new job selling mattresses, as I had been unemployed focusing on school for a while. I move out of my parents' house to go live with my girlfriend, and this is where things turn from weird to extremely unsettling. One night, we decided to go to a nearby store to get something to make food with. When I noticed in my back seat, there was a bunch of fishing lines and hooks again. Startled, I looked around for any sign of anyone being nearby. I told my girlfriend to go back into the house, and I sit up and stare at my car from our bedroom window until morning comes. I don't see anyone or anything. That morning, I get ready for work, and my girlfriend gets ready for college courses, and we leave. The store I was working at during this time had this weird L-shaped design to it, with two separate entrances and a cafe taking up the space in between them. There was one entrance that was easily visible from the front desk, and another that you would have to get up and go see. As I was closing up for the night after the last incident, I go to turn off the open signs and see in the center of the obscured hallway an entire roll of fishing line coiled up, with part of the line leading to the door where a pile of hooks sat. I had no customers that day and didn't hear the alarm going off. I then noticed that someone had turned the door alarms off, but neither I nor my only coworker had ever tampered with that device before, and it was behind the front desk. I was shaking. Someone had been stalking me and leaving these hooks and lines for me to see, but I had no idea what to do. Call the police? Other than the fishing lines and hooks, there was really nothing to trace back to anyone. My store had no security cameras. Corporate would never agree to install them. I figured the best I could do would be to not appear as frightened as I was, in case whoever was doing this was watching and recording me. I thought that if seeing something like this didn't make me go about my day differently, and I wouldn't give whatever reaction this person was looking for, they would just give up and go away. For several more months, I would find fishing lines and hooks in my car, despite it being locked, and my parents, being the only people with extra keys, being much too busy with the construction of their new house and their jobs to take time out of their day to prank me. Once or twice, I would leave notes in my car asking whoever it was why they were doing this, and to please stop. I would find the notes were gone whenever the lines and hooks reappeared, but never got a response. Eventually, after a series of misunderstandings and disagreements with my girlfriend's family, I decided to move out of my girlfriend's house and rented out an apartment with a couple of my friends until my parents' new house could be completed. The very last time I had an encounter with the lines and the hooks, I came home from work to find them strewn about the living room. Stuff had been knocked over, and a few things were broken. However, nothing was taken. My friend, his girlfriend, and their baby were gone at the time, so no one was there when this happened, except for the cats, who were absolutely spooked and wouldn't come out from under the bed for hours. To this day, I still don't know what this person wanted, why they were stalking me in the first place, or what the fishing lines and hooks meant. No one that I know is into fishing at all, and I don't go out of my way to make enemies or cross people. I honestly don't know if this person was someone I knew or a stranger who was very good at covering their tracks. What I know for sure is that I will have anxiety for the rest of my life over this, and I routinely stay up until 4 or 5 in the morning, because in addition to several other traumatizing experiences, this has made every bump in the night a potential threat for me. It's been about 10 years since I've seen anything more from this person, but instead of feeling reassured that it's finally over, I feel more uneasy that someone has followed me through the many changes in my life. Anyways, I hope you enjoy listening. I'm shaking as I type this out. I haven't really talked about it in great detail to anyone, because simply describing it makes me feel like a lunatic. Not only that, but I don't want to worry my friends and family when there's nothing that they can do about it. This will likely be a mystery that will never be solved.
The cabin was perfect. It was a 2-bedroom tucked into the pine trees, about 20 minutes outside of Mendocino. Little wraparound porch, string lights, One of those open concept kitchens with big windows and this absurdly deep farmhouse sink. I loved every inch of that damn place. We booked it for our 3-year anniversary, just me and Alyssa. No kids, no work, no phone signal. I remember the first thing that she said when we walked in was, "It smells weird in here." I laughed, but she didn't. The host, Lorraine, had left this note on the countertop, handwritten. It said, "Welcome Brandon and Alyssa. Please make yourselves at home. There's wine in the fridge, firewood stacked out back, and a telescope on the deck. Enjoy the view. Sunsets here are everything. One note, the closet in the master bedroom is locked for storage. Please don't try to force it. Thank you." That was that. Warm, casual, totally normal, right? We unpacked, poured some wine, and took 100 selfies with the trees in the background. Everything felt pretty easy, except that closet. It was on the far wall of the bedroom, standard size, stock white door, with this old silver padlock on the latch. Not some high-end combo lock, just one of those clunky ones you can get at pretty much any hardware store. At first, I really didn't say anything, but Alyssa began noticing me glancing at it throughout the night, even while we brushed our teeth. "You're gonna be weird about that closet the whole trip, huh?" "No," I said back. "It's just a locked door and a house that's supposed to be ours for the weekend." "Storage," she reminded me. She said so in the note. But storage for what? It's a vacation rental, not a personal cabin. And that padlock looked pretty new. We laughed it off and went to bed early. And that was the last normal night that we had inside that house. The next day, we were pretty busy. Coffee on the porch, a hike through the redwoods, took more dumb selfies at this overlook, and watched a hawk dive right through the fog. It was a perfect day. Still, every time we came back into the bedroom, my eyes would go straight back to that closet. It didn't do anything, it just sat there, unmoving and locked. But for me, it made that whole room feel off balance, like a splinter in your finger, small and visible, but always there, always present. That night while Alyssa showered, I walked over to it, ran my hand along the grain of the wood. The padlock was old school, a solid metal shackle, key entry. I didn't touch it, just leaned in close. And I could swear when I did so, I heard breathing. Not loud, not even clear, just a faint, steady shift of air. I backed away and almost tripped over the nightstand. When Alyssa came out, towel wrapped around and smiling at me, I didn't say anything to her. I didn't want to ruin the night. We watched a movie, split the last of that wine, and then crawled into bed by 10. But sometime after midnight, I woke up. At first, groggily, I really wasn't sure why, but then I heard it, a soft thump from the closet. Not loud or frantic, just a dull, solid noise, like something shifting inside it. I held my breath, and then another thump, followed by a scratch. I reached over and Alyssa was dead asleep. The house was quiet, no pipes, no wind, no creaking floorboards, just that sound from the closet. I sat up, heart pounding, and just stared at the door. The padlock was still there. I got up and walked over, pressed my ear to the door. Nothing though. I waited a little longer. Then, right at the edge of my hearing, I heard it again, breathing. I sat up and didn't sleep the rest of the night, and the next morning, I told Alyssa. She laughed at me at first, thought I was winding her up or something, but when she saw my face, she stopped. "What kind of sound?" she asked me. "Thumping, scratching, breathing. I know how all that sounds, but it's what I heard." She stared at the closet and bit her lip. "Do you think there's like a animal maybe in there?" "Too big." "What do you mean too big?" "I don't know, the sound, it just felt big, like human." She stepped closer to the closet and looked at the padlock. "It's the same one, right?" "Yeah." We debated about calling the host, and eventually, Alyssa wound up sending a text. "Hey, Brandon thought he heard something in the closet last night. Just want to make sure there's no animal or any issues. Thanks." We waited and didn't get a response. We checked our signal. No bars, so we tried the Wi-Fi. Still out. That's when I remembered the welcome book saying there was a landline in the kitchen. I picked it up and, of course, no dial tone. That afternoon, Alyssa went to go lie down. I stood in the kitchen staring at the fridge, trying to psych myself up to make some kind of lunch. And then I took note of something. The wine bottle. It was on the counter. I know we left it on the coffee table. I walked into the living room, blanket folded, TV remote placed neatly in the center of the rug. Not how we left that either. Alyssa for sure hadn't done it. I asked her, and she swore she didn't. Then we realized we'd both been outside for a while earlier. Alone. Not long, but enough. Somebody had been inside. That night we barricaded the bedroom door with the dresser. Not because of the closet, because of everything else. No cell, no internet, no way to call out. Something had changed. We aren't alone out here. Not really. Alyssa tried her best to stay calm, but her eyes kept darting back and forth through that closet. "What if," she whispered to me, "what if somebody's living in there?" Her words sat in the air like smoke. I didn't answer her. At exactly 2:14 a.m., that scratching started up again. And then, the knob turned. I watched it turn. The padlock held, but something pulled, really hard. I watched the wood flex. Alyssa was awake now. She saw it too and clapped her hand over her mouth. We didn't move or breathe. Then the noise stopped and we waited. Long enough to convince ourselves, hopefully, it was over. Then came a voice from inside that closet. A dry, whispery rasp. "I'm cold." When the sun was up, we left. Didn't pack, didn't clean, didn't say goodbye. Just grabbed our shoes, our phones, and ran. The front door was still locked, but that back slider unlatched. We didn't look in the closet again. We didn't really want to know at this point what was behind it because whatever or whoever was in there wanted us to open it. And we almost did. 15 miles later, we hit the first gas station with signal. Alyssa called the sheriff's department in Mendocino County, filed a report, gave them the address, told them everything, word for word. The dispatcher was polite, said they'd send somebody out, but when we followed up 3 days later, there was no report filed. No record of anything at that cabin at the address, no listing under Lorraine's name. When I checked the rental site, the listing was gone, wiped clean, no history, no reviews, nothing, like it never even existed. Occasionally at night, I find myself thinking back to that voice, the way it sounded like it hadn't spoken in weeks, the way it said just those 2 words, cold. That wasn't a threat, but I don't really know what it was. I think if we answered back, if we had said anything back, if we tried to help, I'm not sure we would have made it out. We might be part of the closet now too. And then somebody else would be reading Lorraine's welcome note, drinking her wine, ignoring the locked door on that far wall. It was only supposed to be for one night, just a crash pad on the way to Flagstaff. Me and my friend Nate road tripping from LA, trying to make it to his cousin's wedding without coughing up any hotel money. We found this little place in the desert outside Kingman, cheap and clean. A small adobe-style house off a dirt road with gravel driveway and a sagging porch. It had character, 4 stars, no real red flags. And it was available for that one night only. I snapped it up in 5 minutes flat. We got there just around 8 p.m. Sun was already gone, air still warm around us. My phone was on 3% battery, but I had the check-in instructions saved. Thank God. Key under the fake rock by the front steps. Simple enough. I grabbed it and walked to the door and stopped because, well, it was already open. Just slightly. Nate glanced over at me. Did you open it?" "No, dude, I just got the key." He slowly pushed it the rest of the way open and the lights were on. We both stood there for a second, long enough to notice the TV flickering in the living room, and a beer can on the kitchen island, and a pair of sandals by the door. Somebody was already here. I double-checked the listing. August 12th, 1 night, 2 guests. Reservation confirmed. Then a voice from inside. Hello? Two people stepped around the corner. A couple, mid-30s maybe, normal looking, slightly confused. Just like us. A guy was holding his phone. Are you the owners? No, I said back. We booked this place tonight. They both immediately looked at each other. So did we. So we both pulled up our confirmations. Same address, same date, same check-in instructions. Nate and the guy walked outside to call the host, and of course, no answer. I stayed in the kitchen, awkwardly sipping water from the sink while the woman made small talk. This is nuts, she said. We stayed at like 20 rentals. This has never happened to us. We agreed to be chill, said it was probably some kind of glitch. Look, let's just stay on opposite ends of the house, the guy said, and we'll leave first thing in the morning. It wasn't ideal, but we were both really tired. The place had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. There was plenty of space. I guess we figured we can survive one night. But we shouldn't have stayed, because those people weren't who they said they were, and by morning, only 1 pair of shoes was still by the front door. That first hour was completely fine. We stayed in our room, and they stayed in theirs. Everybody was making these nervous jokes about tech glitches and modern problems. I played music low on my phone while Nate scrolled through Instagram, and eventually we both started to nod off. Then, out of nowhere, the lights go out, and not just in our room, the whole house. A hard click like a breaker's flipping. Nate sat up. Hey, you hear that? I opened up the door. The hallway was pitch black. Hey, I called out. You guys good? No answer. I stepped forward and the floorboards creaked below me. That kind of creak you feel in your bones more than your actual ears. I found the kitchen by memory, grabbed my phone for light and aimed it around me. The breaker panel was just outside on the porch, so I went to the front door. I stopped. The sandals that were there earlier now were gone, and a breeze was moving through the house. Then a door slammed somewhere in the back. We got the power back on by flipping the main breaker, but the other couple didn't come out of the room after that. Nate knocked once lightly. Hey, everything all right in there? He was only met with silence. We went back to our room and locked the door, and that's when we noticed something. My duffel bag was now open. Not how I left that. Nate's wallet was on the floor, cards pulled halfway out. He picked it up slowly. Did you? I shook my head. We sat there for a long time, not talking, just listening. Every now and again, there'd be a soft shuffle in the hall, and once I heard water run for 5 seconds, then shut off. Around 3 a.m., I had to piss, but I didn't want to leave the room. I couldn't hold it anymore. I eased the door open, barefoot, phone in hand. The hallway light was off again. I crept toward the bathroom, passing the living room, and stopped cold. The woman was standing there, in the corner. Not moving, just standing, barefoot, facing the wall, arms down at her sides. Almost like she'd been placed there, full Blair Witch bullshit. I froze and she didn't react, not even when the floor creaked under my feet. I backed up slowly and made it to the bathroom and locked the door. Inside, the cabinet under the sink was wide open. Inside that, my backpack. All right, I'm done. Time to fucking bounce. I woke Nate, told him what I saw, and he didn't argue. We threw our shit together fast and made for the front door. And now it was locked. Not deadbolted, but chained from the inside. That chain had not been there when we arrived. Nate moved to unlock it. That's when the guy stepped out of the second bedroom, right behind him, and he had a bat in his hand. Aluminum, clean, and brand new. You guys leaving already? He asked. I moved between them slowly. Yeah, we're heading out, early start. He smiled. You sure? You've only been here for a few hours. And that's when I noticed this scar, a thick white line across his throat, like somebody had already tried to cut him a long time ago. He saw me looking and his smile widened. From behind me, the woman whispered, "We just wanted some company." Nate unlocked the chain and I yanked the door open, and we both ran. Didn't stop until we hit the car. We jumped in, slammed the doors, and started it up with shaking hands. They didn't follow, they just stood in the doorway, watching us drive away. We filed a report the next morning. Cops visited the rental, found nothing, no couple, no bat, no signs of any kind of break-in. When they pulled the reservation logs from the property manager, there was only one booking listing for that night, ours. They checked the key logs, only one use on the key box, ours. There's no sign or record of anybody else being there. And the strange part, the owners hadn't rented that house in almost a year, said that they'd taken it offline after a break-in. When the property manager asked us who gave us the link, we pulled it up and of course, listing gone, wiped. The only thing left in the browser history was this weird dead redirect, something called sharebnb.co/justforyou. We waited weeks for answers and there never were any. A cop said the locks hadn't been tampered with, the host hadn't given out any kind of spare key. No prints besides ours, no damage, no physical evidence, no nothing. They treated us like we were exaggerating something, maybe mistaken, maybe high. But I remember the bat. I remember the woman staring at the wall like she was possessed. I remember my backpack moved into a space that I hadn't touched, a very weird one at that. We tried to track that link again, sharebnb.co/justforyou, but it was gone. Even the cached version led nowhere, a blank page with the words, "Thank you for booking." And beneath that, in this tiny gray font, more guests arrive every day. We booked that cabin because we wanted some kind of quiet. My wife Laura needed a break from work and the kids were burnt out from school, and I just wanted to feel like a man again. Build some fires, grill some steaks, let my youngest shoot a BB gun at cans from the deck, pretend that we were pioneers instead of just tired people from Phoenix. It was a rental just outside of Pine Top, up past the ski cabins and seasonal condos, far enough away from the main road that the last stretch was all dirt and pine needles. The photos made it look rustic, but clean. Big stone fireplace, bunk beds, a wraparound porch with a hot tub that barely worked but looked really great in those pictures. And no cell service. That was really the appeal to us. No buzzing or news, no texts from work, just the five of us, me, Lauren, our teenage daughter Emma, and the twins, Ryan and Blake, 9 years old and always yelling about something. We got there on a Thursday afternoon. Weather was perfect. The air had that high country scent, half pine, half soil, like the whole mountain was freshly watered. We unpacked, picked bedrooms, and let the kids explore the trails behind the house. It really did feel like a reset. Dinner was burgers on the grill, sunset through the trees, s'mores over the fire pit. Emma rolled her eyes at the twins and pretended not to be having fun. Laura sipped red wine from a camping mug and said, "We should do this every year." It really was the kind of night that you don't realize you'll miss until it's gone. Then a knock came at 3 a.m., 3 sharp raps, right at the front door. I sat up in bed, heart pounding like I'd been yanked from underwater. Laura whispered to me, "What was that?" "I don't know. Stay here." I grabbed the fireplace poker and crept down the stairs barefoot. The knock didn't come again. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing, just moonlight and trees. So I opened up the door. Nobody there, no footprints, no wind, just the cold, quiet woods and the sound of blood in my ears. I closed the door and locked the deadbolt and checked the windows one by one. Still didn't see anything. Not a branch out of place, not even a breeze. So I told myself maybe it was an animal, a falling pine cone. Hell, maybe the twins left something against the door that tipped over. Now, I didn't believe it, of course, but I needed to say it. Laura didn't ask any questions when I got back into bed, just pulled the blanket tighter and slid closer to me. The next morning, I checked the front porch again, still nothing, but there were boot prints and they weren't ours. They weren't there the day before either, big ones, treaded, not hiking boots, work boots. I followed them. They started down the gravel drive and led up to the porch steps and then stopped at the front door. No return trail though, just a set of tracks coming in from the woods. I didn't tell Laura. I just kept an eye out, didn't let the kids go exploring that day, said there were bears in the area and I didn't want to risk it. I checked my phone, still no service. I tried the cabin's emergency Wi-Fi hotspot, and of course it was dead. The landline by the kitchen was unplugged, some frayed wires with no dial tone, no signal, no internet, no fallback. It was just us. That night I locked everything down, windows, curtains, and I left the outside lights on. But at 3 a.m. once more, the knocking came back, same rhythm, same 3 knocks. This time Laura actually heard it too. She sat up straight first, eyes wide. "That's not an animal." I nodded back at her. She reached for her phone, but I already knew it was no help. I got out of bed and grabbed that same poker and moved slowly down the hallway. When I reached the living room, I didn't go to the door right away this time. I looked out the side window first and saw somebody standing on the porch. Not moving, not speaking, just standing. His face was in shadow, wearing something heavy like a jacket, arms at his sides, head tilted slightly like he was listening. Then, like he felt me watching, he turned and looked straight at the window, and I quickly ducked out of view. I didn't breathe, I didn't blink, and when I looked again, he was gone. I didn't sleep and stayed up the rest of the night, and at sunrise I walked the perimeter. Boot prints were everywhere this time, around the porch, around the sides, by the window, even at the back door, like he'd been circling while we slept. When I went to check our SUV, the tires were slashed, all 4, clean cuts. Then I had to tell Laura everything, the guy, the footprints, the tires. I thought that she'd fall apart. Instead, she went into triage mode, packed snacks, filled the bathtubs, charged flashlights, and the kids started asking questions we didn't want to answer. I found a trail cam nailed to a pine tree just off the back deck, and that wasn't ours, not part of the listing at least, and definitely not mentioned in the binder. I pulled a card and popped it into my laptop. Each file was named by timestamp, and each one was a photo, black and white, motion triggered. At first, all of the files were us, unpacking the car, kids running down the trail, me at the grill. Then came the night shots, us through the window, sleeping, sitting at dinner, Laura brushing her teeth, me reading a book, all taken from that tree line. Then the final file, it was from the night before, a full body shot. That man, standing on the porch, inches from the door, looking into the camera, his face lit by the porch light. Not a ski mask, no balaclava, just a man's face, plain and unbothered. That night we took turns watching the windows. Laura kept the kids in our room, reading bedtime stories, and she didn't finish. At 3 a.m. we heard footsteps on the roof. That wasn't a bird or the wind. Footsteps, slow and creeping. It went from one side of the house to the other. I raised that poker, and Laura grabbed the fire extinguisher. We waited. A soft clatter then came from the chimney. At dawn, I spotted something on the back deck, nailed to the railing with a screwdriver. A photo, one of the trail cam prints. Our family sitting at dinner, Emma smiling, Laura was mid-laugh and me mid-bite. Scrawled across the bottom in thick black marker, "Thank you for staying." We left as soon as the sun cleared, didn't even drive the SUV, we hiked out. Me still with that fire poker, Laura with the twins, and Emma dragging a duffel bag. It took us almost 2 hours on foot to reach the main road. I flagged down a tow truck, and the guy thought I was crazy until I showed him the photo. He didn't really ask many questions after that, just nodded and gave us a ride back into town. He even agreed to go pick up our car after we gave him the address. The police were polite, not helpful. They took my statement, looked at the tire tracks, the trail cam, the prints in the dirt, said they'd check the local trail cams, maybe put in a request for footage from nearby hunting blinds. But without a name or suspect, I knew nothing would really come of it. It was just another trespassing incident. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no real damage. When I asked him about the trail cam, the deputy just shrugged at me. There's a lot of creeps out there, and some just want to watch. This happened around 2010 when I was still a kid. We lived in a small house surrounded by trees, a place that felt tucked away but was only a few minutes from town. It was me, my mom, my dad, my cousin, my aunt, and her husband all under the same roof. Most of the days were pretty ordinary. My cousin and I were usually watched by my mom while everybody else went to work. The air always smelled like pine, and deer would wander through the yard pretty much daily. The three of us spent a lot of time in the house alone. The kind of home that seemed peaceful by day and a little eerie by night. We had only one neighbor, an older man who mostly kept to himself, and at that age, I didn't think twice about being isolated. It was just a normal life. Bugs, animals, big storms, it was all routine. The strange thing about what happened that day is that everybody remembers it clearly, yet none of us remember it the same way. In my version, my mom was doing my hair. She loved to braid it every morning. I was wearing a plain white t-shirt, sitting still while she worked her fingers through my hair when everything in the room suddenly goes red. At first, I assumed I was imagining it, but the light got stronger until it filled every corner. I remember the walls glowing, the floorboards picking up the color like blood-tinted glass. It wasn't a sunset, way too fast and bright. I looked up from my lap and the whole world felt slow, as if time itself had paused, and I couldn't even hear my heartbeat. The windows in front of me were uncovered. The light came straight through them, thick and steady, almost humming in a way that I could feel in my teeth. I glanced up toward my mom, expecting her to move, but she was frozen, mid-gesture, eyes wide. My cousin had backed into the far corner of the room and was staring toward the ceiling. For a moment, I really thought everything outside must be burning, but there was no smoke. The air didn't even feel warm. It was just red, pure red, with no shadows, no shapes, and no sounds. Then it vanished. One blink, it's there. Next, it's gone. Time seemed to slam back to normal speed. The sound of the clock returned, and I could hear birds again. I remember standing there shaking and asked my mom what that was. She stared at the window for a few moments before finally saying that she didn't know. Her version doesn't match mine. She said that she wasn't doing my hair at all. She'd been helping me with homework at the table when the red light came in. She swore that she grabbed both me and my cousin and hid in the corner, holding on until it faded completely. She remembers being certain that something was outside, though she never saw what it was. We've compared memories dozens of times now, and she insists that her story is true. I'm just as sure about mine. My cousin, however, never really likes to talk about it, and when he does, it's short and very uneasy. He says the light had weight to it, that it pressed down on him, but he kind of clams up after that. He never told us which version that he remembers, or if he remembers something different entirely. As the years pass on, the event never really leaves us. Sometimes we'll laugh about it, saying we were abducted, came back with different memories, but when I mention it now, my mom will still tense up. She hates red light too, can't stand it. If I use red light therapy or even a red night lamp, she gets anxious, will tell me to turn it off. A few years ago, I actually stumbled across a local article online about people seeing these strange lights in that same area around the same time. Some would claim it's a UFO sighting, and we ended up moving away long before, but reading that still made my stomach drop. Now personally, I never saw a craft, I never saw any figures, never even heard a sound. All I know is that time felt thin, the air felt heavy, and the world went red. Strangest experience of my life for sure. I still wonder what happened that day, and I guess I'll never really understand it completely. Something that brushed against us for a second then slipped away, leaving only a partial memory in its wake. I used to live in a suburban neighborhood inside Tennessee. When you grow up in a place like this, you learn early that the forests aren't for playing. The woods just don't play in the South. My sister and I were strictly told to never go in the forest alone. I moved away when I was 8, and this happened right around that time. My friend had come over for a play date. We were hanging out in my backyard. Now, the yard is kind of strange. It sloped down sharply and ended right at the edge of the huge forest. That mattered because once you go down the hill, you couldn't really hear anybody on the deck unless they were yelling. There was this open tree line that led to a narrow trail winding deep into the woods. Being young and dumb, we thought it'd be fun to explore it. I didn't feel like running all the way back up the hill to tell my parents where we were going, so I didn't. We just kind of went. At first, everything was fine. We played around, threw some sticks, had some laughs, but when we started heading back towards my house, I heard something. Footsteps or branches snapping nearby. It felt like danger. I got this heavy feeling in my stomach like something or someone was watching us. My friend didn't say anything, but she didn't argue when I said that we should hurry back. Just as we reached the edge of the forest, I hear my mom's voice. She was calling for me somewhere off in the trees, saying that she was hurt, needed my help. That froze me. It was definitely her voice, same tone, same southern hint. It just didn't make any sense. That danger feeling grew and grew. My head was telling me, go help her, but my gut was screaming to run. I took a few steps toward the voice before my friend grabbed my arm, and in that moment, the quote-unquote spell broke. My heart slammed into my chest, and my friend was pointing back up toward the deck. When I looked up, there was my mother, standing there waving, holding out popsicles. I could barely hear her calling out to us, but my friend had seen her walk outside, so we bolted up the hill as fast as we could. When we reached the porch, I asked my mom if she'd been in the woods. She frowned and said no, she'd been napping inside, woke up with this weird feeling that she needed to check on us. I never told her about the voice in the trees. I think she already knew that something was wrong, and I didn't really want to worry her anymore. That night after she tucked me in, I remember lying there in bed, staring out the window toward that same tree line. The moonlight was soft enough that I could see the shapes of the woods, the black outlines of branches shifting off in the wind. At first, all very normal. But then something else moved. A darker shape slid between the trees, almost like liquid. It paused, then turned as if it knew I was watching it. I ducked under the covers, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. And after that, I stopped sleeping with the blinds open. Even during the day, the woods around me would make me uneasy. Sometimes I'd catch flashes of something pale moving between the trees, or hear what sounded like breathing outside my window. A few weeks later, before we moved, my mom mentioned finding these claw marks on the back door. Thin, deep scratches just below the handle, like somebody had been testing how to get inside. She said it was probably raccoons. Fair warning to anybody visiting, stay out of the woods. I know the locals know exactly what I'm talking about. When I was in 5th or 6th grade, I learned what it meant to be alone in a house that suddenly didn't really feel like ours. I'm gonna be honest, I don't tell this story very much. My little sister Kinsley and I both came down with chickenpox that week. We were blotched, itchy, half mad from trying not to scratch anything. Kinsley made sure that we stuck together, pressing her face against mine, making me play dolls and tag even when she was burning up. A day later, I was covered head to toe. She was thrilled. Mom was too. She said it'd be easier if we both just kind of got it out of the way at the same time. My mom did what most moms did there in the 90s. Oatmeal baths, calamine lotion, lukewarm ginger ale, along with some VHS tapes stacked on the coffee table. She had to work, same as Dad, and our timing really couldn't have been worse. My dad would leave before dawn. My mom hung on long enough to make us some toast, measure the antihistamine, and tape the emergency numbers to the fridge. She kissed Kinsley on the forehead, looked at me and said, "You're old enough to keep an eye on things." I believed her. 11 felt old, ancient. I was a man. By God, I had just been put in charge too, for real this time, and for the first time in my life. Sure, watching the house here and there for 30 minutes, no big deal, but getting to run the whole show all day with my sister to boot, it felt like I was just elected president. The house was quiet after she left, the heater ticking, pipes knocking, and the fridge giving its low moan every few minutes. Normal house sounds, safe and familiar to my ears. Kinsley and I built a fort out of blankets, watched cartoons until noon. We called it Fort Chickipaki. Crawling around inside the blankets and fabrics was a good way to itch our skin too, without actually scratching with our fingernails. We fought about which tape to play next, and she ended up picking Ferngully. I booed for a straight 5 minutes. The itching would come in waves, sharp little reminders that we were diseased but free. I liked it though, being out of school, having the house to ourselves. But I caved in, watched the movie anyway with her. Every now and again, I caught her reflections in the dark TV screen, 2 little speckled goblins, half-dressed and scabbed up, laughing and just making it through. It felt like a small vacation, just with a few rules. Stay put, don't scratch, answer the phone if it's mom, and of course, lock the door. I remember how proud I actually felt locking the front door. By mid-morning, the light through the curtains had turned gold. The air in the house smelled like oatmeal and rubbing alcohol. Kinsley was humming to herself on the couch, tapping her legs, restless already. I thought the day would drag on like any other sick day, long, boring, and harmless. I didn't know the house could actually change sides though, and I didn't know family could too. The morning felt normal. Mom called around 9 to check in. I told her we were fine. She said that she'd grab some soup on lunch break, maybe even come home early. I told her not to worry. Big man words. Kinsley still sat there glued to the TV while I ended up taking a shower. My skin burned from the soap, but at least it quieted the itching a little bit. The water beat on the tile, steady and safe, and when I shut it off, the house was dead silent around me. I called out but didn't get an answer. I got dressed and walked into the hallway, and that's when I saw her leaning over the couch, face pressed up against the window. "What are you doing?" I asked her. She didn't move. "Uncle Dwayne's here." It caught me off guard. Dad's brother, always half drunk, sometimes mean and always unpredictable. I came to her side and looked for myself. This old truck sat at an angle in the driveway. Dwayne stomped through the yard in his denim jacket, pulling at boxes near the garage. He lifted a gas can, a bundle of cords, and tossed him into the truck bed. "It looks like he's just borrowing something," I said. I watched him wander, searching for whatever it might be. Sometimes he came to borrow tools or materials, whatever, so I really thought that's just what this was, one of those visits. And then he turned toward the house. "Duck," I whispered, and we dropped behind the couch. His boots then crunched their way toward the house, and the porch steps creaked. The screen door opened, then the deadbolt clicked. He had a key though. The front door closed behind him, and the sound was soft but final. I grabbed Kinsley's hand and whispered that we needed to go upstairs. We moved fast, skipping every noisy step into her room, and I locked that flimsy knob. Downstairs, it was silence again. The fridge door opened, a hiss of a beer can. He was inside, comfortable, like he was right at home. Kinsley trembled next to me. "Why is he here?" I didn't know. I crouched by the floor vent and just continued to listen. I heard him move through the living room, grabbing tapes, shoving things into a grocery sack. He wasn't looking for tools, he was just straight up taking stuff for himself. I mouthed that he was stealing. We waited and the TV came on. Then another can cracked open. He was settling in. I wanted to just wait it out, but time stretched and we were itchy. Finally, the TV went quiet. No footsteps, just the hum of the fridge. I whispered at Kinsley to stay here, and I slipped out, but Kinsley followed anyway. The house now smelled like beer and sweat. I stepped around this overturned chair, heart pounding so loud that I could feel it in my teeth. The kitchen in front of me was wrecked, drawers open, fridge ransacked. The living room was too, but no Uncle Dwayne. Then I heard a low laugh from down the hall in my parents' room. I crept forward and peeked around the doorframe. He stood by my mom's dresser, a hand buried in her underwear drawer. He lifted a pair and sniffed them, pocketed them, and chuckled again. I gasped out loud and it gave myself away. He spun around, eyes red and wet. "The hell are you doing here?" And for a second, we just stared at one another. And then he came for us. The beer can flew first, hitting the door and bursting. Foam sprayed across the carpet. "Come here, you little freaks." I pulled Kinsley down the hall. He followed, crashing into walls, knocking down pictures. "You spying on me?" We tore through the kitchen, socks slipping on linoleum. He grabbed at my shirt, missed only by inches. His breath hit me from the back of my neck, sour and rank. Uncle Dwayne always had really bad teeth, and I could smell the rot as he continued to chase me. I told Kinsley to run, and we cut through the dining room, looped around the table, and sprinted for the stairs, but he was too fast. I yanked Kinsley toward the back door instead. He slammed into the counter behind us, shouting, "I'll kill you!" The back door stuck. I twisted the lock and threw my shoulder into it. It burst open and cool morning air washed over us. We flew off the porch and down into the yard, and I heard him hit the door frame behind us, turning it into splinter on impact. I remember thinking I was being chased by a zombie. We sprinted for the fence. Ground tore underneath my feet. My hands hit the top board and we slipped. He was right behind me, shouting nothing but threats and curses. I pushed Kinsley up and over, and she stumbled and tumbled to the other side. I swung a leg up, and his hand caught my ankle. I yelled at him to let go, kicked, wild and desperately. My heel ended up hitting something soft. He grunted and then fell back. I rolled over the fence and hit dirt. The world went quiet except for Kinsley sobbing. Then a voice behind us. "Hey, what's going on over there?" Mr. Ellison, our next door neighbor. He was in his yard holding up a rake. "Help!" I shouted to him. "He's in our house." Dwayne came around the side of the fence on the road, staggering, red-faced, veins sticking out like pipework. Mr. Ellison dropped the rake and stepped forward. "You better get the hell out of here, Dwayne. I'm calling the cops." For a second, nobody moved. Then Dwayne started yelling again, throwing things, rocks, a plastic chair, anything he could get his hands on. "Go inside, kids," Mr. Ellison said. "Now." He turned back to Dwayne. "I got a gun." That did stop him. For a moment, he just stood there and glared, chest heaving. Then he spat on the grass and growled, "Tell my brother I came back for my money." He stomped over to his truck, slammed the door, and peeled away. I stood there shaking, lungs screaming. My arm still itched. My skin was crawling under the scabs. Kinsley clung to me, crying hard enough to hiccup. When I looked down at us, we were dirty, covered in chickenpox, and it honestly made me cry too. Mr. Ellison called the police from his porch, and I could still smell Dwayne in the air. Beer, motor oil, and just gross decay. I looked back at the house. The open door swung in the wind, slow and tired. There would be no fixing it, that was obvious. I remember looking at it and being scared of what my dad would say, even though I didn't do it. Still, they put me in charge, and from where I was standing, I'd failed. That was the first time that I understood that adults, that people, were the real monsters. The rest of that afternoon is still pretty blurry, but some parts burned clear as fire. The police came, Mr. Ellison had them on the phone before Dwayne even cleared the street. 2 cruisers showed up, sirens off, lights off. It made me think that they didn't even believe this was important. One cop took Kinsley and me onto a porch, while the other went inside with his hands on his gun. The house was destroyed, beer cans everywhere, drawers dumped, couch cushions gutted. My mom's dresser was overturned. It smelled like stale cigarettes and sweat. And I remember the cop shining his flashlight on the floor, clicking his tongue and saying, "Jesus Christ." "All right, kids, how long was he inside for?" the other officer asked. "I don't know, maybe 10 minutes, I responded. My mom got there maybe 40 minutes later, hair standing on end, still in her work uniform. Dad wasn't far behind. They ran straight to us. Mom hugged us so hard that it hurt, and Kinsley finally broke down for real this time, like ugly sobs. I remember my mom whispering that, "You're okay, baby, you're okay." I told them about everything, and so did Kinsley through hiccups and tears. The words would come out in bursts. The shower, the truck, the beer, the screaming. Dad didn't say a thing until the cop asked if he wanted to press charges against his brother. Then his jaw locked up. The next few days kind of just dragged on. The police would come back twice. One took fingerprints off the dresser and the kitchen counter. Another asked us to tell them the story again and again. Each time it felt more distant, like it happened to somebody else. They found Dwayne's truck 2 towns over that night, parked behind a bar. He was passed out inside, still half drunk and half coherent. He spent a week in jail, got probation, and then had to go to some kind of counseling, nothing serious. And after that, we never saw him again. My mom changed the locks the same week. Dad put motion lights up on the porch and put up this heavy-duty security door. They argued in whispers every single night. And one time I heard Dad say that, "I told you he'd snap one day." My mom just cried. Kinsley wouldn't sleep alone for a month. Every creak would make her jump. I tried to act tough, but I'd wake up sweating myself, convinced that I heard his shoes or boots on the stairs again. I'd walk the hall at night, stare out that same window where she'd first seen him. And sometimes I'd imagine his truck parked there once more, tailgate down, his shadow moving amongst the trees. Now, Dwayne never came back, but that feeling never left. Even years later, when I was old enough to understand addiction and anger and how men like Dwayne rot from the inside out, I still can't shake what it felt like. The sound of him crossing our porch, the clicking of the door, the moment our house stopped being ours. It's funny how quick safety really will disappear. One second you're a kid in pajamas, eating toast and watching cartoons. The next, you're crouched behind a couch, realizing that the world cares little for you. In fact, it might not even know you exist at all. My mom mentioned to me once that Dwayne had moved out of state, somewhere near the border. She said he sobered up and he called to apologize years later, but she didn't put him on speaker and we never spoke. I don't know if it would have helped anything anyway. I'm 40-something now, married, 2 kids of my own, and I still double-check the locks every night. Still keep a bat behind the bedroom door, and I tell my kids not to open up the door for anybody, not even family. They think I'm paranoid, and maybe I am.